Tonight, we're stepping quietly into a world that shaped much of the modern West, a world where the rhythm of life was ruled not only by power and politics, but by something more intimate and mysterious: how people rested their bodies and minds after a long day. Imagine the bustling streets of ancient Rome, the clatter of sandals on stone, the murmur of crowded markets, and the glow of oil lamps flickering in the cool evening air. Yet beneath this vibrant city, behind the grand villas and noisy insula, was a secret world of sleep, strange, unpredictable, and deeply revealing. Welcome to Weird Sleep Habits of Ancient Romans and More, a slow journey into the night, where we'll unravel how a civilization famed for conquest and innovation found rest, comfort, and sometimes terror in the darkness. Tonight, you won't just learn facts. You'll walk through Roman bedrooms, feel the weight of their beds, hear the silence of their nights broken by dreams and fears, and discover how their sleep shaped their world. It's a story of humanity itself, of vulnerability and routine, of superstition and science, and of a timeless quest for peace in the quiet hours. So find your own comfortable place, close your eyes when you're ready, and let's drift back over 2 millennia to uncover the night secrets of ancient Rome. Introduction to Roman sleep culture. Sleep, as we understand it today, often seems like a simple, continuous rest tucked away into one long night's slumber. But for the ancient Romans, sleep was a complex cultural practice, shaped by their architecture, social structure, spiritual beliefs, and the natural rhythms of the world around them. Unlike modern patterns of a single, unbroken sleep, Romans often practiced what modern historians and anthropologists call biphasic sleep, a habit of dividing the night into two separate sleeps, with a period of wakefulness between them. This ancient sleep pattern was not a mere necessity or quirk, but a ritualistic rhythm ingrained deeply in their daily and spiritual lives. Imagine the sprawling city of Rome as dusk descends. The city's stone buildings cast long shadows, the bustling streets grow quieter, and families prepare to retreat indoors. In the urban insulae, multi-story apartment buildings packed tightly with plebeian families, space was limited and privacy rare. Here, many shared rooms and beds, and sleep was often interrupted by the sounds of neighbors or the vibrant nightlife below. Contrast this with the spacious villas of wealthy patricians, where large bedrooms with stone or wooden floors and thick walls provided quiet sanctuaries for more restful sleep. The layout and design of these homes played a crucial role in shaping sleep habits. The first sleep, known as prima dormita, would come shortly after sunset. Romans would recline on beds crafted with wooden frames and stuffed mattresses made of straw, wool, or feathers, depending on one's social status. A bed was not just a piece of furniture, but a symbol of comfort and status, with wealthier families often boasting elaborate wooden bedsteads with cushions and curtains for privacy. After a few hours in deep rest, Romans typically awoke for a period of 1 or 2 hours, often called the watch, or vigilia. This time was not wasted in frustration or insomnia, but was an active and reflective part of the night. During these waking hours, individuals might read scrolls by the flickering light of oil lamps, write letters, engage in quiet conversation with family or servants, or perform rituals and prayers to the gods. This interlude was often considered a sacred time between the worlds of wakefulness and sleep, between the earthly and the divine. The spiritual significance of this waking period cannot be overstated. Dreams occupied a special place in Roman culture, seen as messages from the gods or glimpses into the future. Dream interpretation, or oneiromancy, was a respected art practiced by priests and commoners alike. A dream could predict success or disaster, warn of enemies, or offer guidance for difficult decisions. Romans believed that the gods communicated during this vulnerable period, when the soul was more accessible, making dreams powerful spiritual experiences. Thus, this waking interval was often used to meditate on dreams, record them, or consult dream interpreters. The night itself was charged with divine presence and superstition. Romans believed in deities like Somnus, the god of sleep, who could grant peaceful rest or induce nightmares. Protective spirits, such as the lemurs and mans, roamed the night, representing restless souls of the dead. Households would perform rituals and offer prayers to ensure these spirits caused no harm during sleep. Some families kept small charms or amulets by their beds to ward off evil influences. The act of sleeping was therefore not just physical rest, but a guarded passage through a spiritual landscape. Roman society also revered the cyclical nature of time, closely aligned with the sun and moon. Without modern electric lighting, natural light governed daily schedules strictly. The sun's rising and setting dictated work, leisure, and rest. Nighttime was reserved for sleep, but was punctuated with moments of wakefulness under the moon's gentle light or by the flicker of oil lamps. This harmony with nature extended to their understanding of health. Balancing the body's rhythms with the environment was considered essential for well-being. Beyond individual homes, the city itself had a pulse at night. Noise from the streets, taverns, and night markets mingled with the occasional watchman's call, creating a unique soundscape. Romans accepted that sleep would be lighter or broken in urban settings. The wealthy might retreat to countryside villas or baths to escape the bustle, where the stillness of nature encouraged deeper rest. This biphasic sleep cycle had practical as well as cultural reasons. The first sleep allowed the body to enter deep restorative stages, while the waking period provided mental stimulation, social bonding, or spiritual reflection. The second sleep, or secunda dormita, followed, lasting until dawn when the city would awaken anew. This pattern, deep sleep, wakefulness, deep sleep, was the natural order for many, attuned to the cycles of darkness and light. Sleep in ancient Rome was also interwoven with social status. For slaves and the poor, sleep was often less comfortable and more disrupted. Crowded rooms, hard surfaces, and the demands of labor meant rest was often fragmented and shorter. For the elite, sleep was a luxurious retreat with elaborate bedding, private chambers, and nighttime rituals designed to enhance comfort and peace. This disparity highlights how the physical and social environment shaped even the most personal human experience. In sum, the sleep habits of ancient Romans reveal a culture that embraced the night as a time of rest, reflection, and spiritual communication. Their biphasic pattern challenges modern assumptions about how humans must sleep and invites us to reflect on the diversity of sleep traditions across history. The rituals, architecture, and beliefs surrounding Roman sleep paint a picture of a civilization deeply connected to natural cycles and divine mysteries, a world where the night was a sacred journey between consciousness and dreams. As we explore these ancient habits, we gain not only historical knowledge, but also a profound appreciation for the ways human beings have negotiated rest, health, and spirituality across time. The Roman approach to sleep teaches us that rest is not merely the absence of activity, but a rich, meaningful experience shaped by culture, belief, and environment. Roman bedrooms and architecture of rest. When considering how ancient Romans rested, much of their experience was shaped not only by cultural customs, but by the very architecture of their homes. The design of Roman sleeping quarters, from cramped urban insulae apartments to expansive countryside villas, was a silent yet profound influence on sleep quality, habits, and even social dynamics. To understand Roman sleep, one must first step into the diverse living spaces that accommodated these daily rituals of rest. In the heart of Rome and other bustling cities, the insulae were the dominant form of housing for the majority of the population. These multi-story apartment buildings, often rising 4 or 5 stories high, were the architectural response to the swelling urban population. The insulae were constructed from brick, concrete, and timber, frequently packed tightly together with narrow streets threading between them. Inside, families occupied small, often singular rooms that served as sleeping, living, and cooking spaces. Privacy was minimal, and walls thin, allowing the cacophony of city life to infiltrate even the most private moments. The bedrooms in insulae were modest at best, often nothing more than alcoves or corners partitioned by wooden screens or simple curtains. Floors were usually stone or packed earth, sometimes covered with woven mats or animal hides for some cushioning. Beds were often rudimentary wooden frames topped with straw mattresses, sometimes stuffed with wool or feathers for those who could afford it. However, for many poorer Romans, the reality was a hard, uncomfortable sleep on bare surfaces or shared bedding. Given these cramped conditions, sleep was fragmented and vulnerable to disturbance. Sounds from the streets below, vendors calling, Carts rolling over cobblestones and the chatter of neighbors filled the nights. It was common for several family members to sleep in the same room, sometimes in shifts, especially if economic necessity demanded a night worker or caregiver to remain alert. The architecture of the insulae, while pragmatic, created an environment where uninterrupted deep sleep was a luxury rather than a guarantee. In contrast, the homes of Rome's elite offered a vastly different setting for rest. The suburban and countryside villas, sprawling estates surrounded by gardens, fountains, and colonnaded peristyles, were designed with rest and leisure as central features. These homes incorporated specialized rooms dedicated to sleeping, the cubicula. Unlike the multi-purpose spaces of the insula, cubicula were private, often richly decorated chambers with thick walls, small windows, and sometimes adjoining bath chambers to facilitate comfort. The design of the cubiculum was intentional in promoting restful sleep. The small windows, often covered with translucent cloth or shutters, kept out the harsh sun and street noise, creating a cool, shaded interior ideal for daytime naps or evening sleep. Floors were paved with mosaic tiles or covered with carpets, while the beds themselves were crafted with fine woods, adorned with cushions, and layered with blankets and linens made of wool or linen. Wealthy Romans sometimes had feather beds imported from distant regions, providing a plush surface that was a symbol of luxury and status. The villa's architecture also incorporated natural ventilation and shading through colonnades and garden layouts, ensuring the sleeping chambers remained cool during the Mediterranean summer nights. The design encouraged a connection with nature, as many cubicula opened onto private gardens or courtyards where the sound of water and rustling leaves created a soothing backdrop conducive to relaxation. Beyond the physical structure, the spatial arrangement within the villa reflected Roman social norms around rest and privacy. Sleeping quarters were often segregated by gender and status. The paterfamilias, the male head of household, had his own private cubiculum, while his wife and children had separate chambers. Slaves, even those serving closely within the household, typically slept in less comfortable quarters, often communal rooms near the kitchen or servants' quarters. The architecture reinforced social hierarchies, even in sleep. Lighting was another important architectural and social consideration. Without electric lighting, Romans used oil lamps and candles to illuminate rooms after sunset, but these sources were dim and flickering. Many bedrooms had niches or wall brackets designed specifically to hold lamps safely. In wealthier homes, lamps were crafted from bronze or terracotta and decorated with intricate designs, emphasizing the importance of light in creating a peaceful nighttime environment. The low light levels encouraged the eyes and body to prepare for rest, aligning with the natural rhythms of dusk and dawn. Roman architects and builders also considered acoustics and insulation to varying degrees. In villas, thick stone walls and double-layered windows helped mute external noises, while in insulae, thin walls and shared floors often meant sleep was punctuated by the sounds of daily life. To cope with these challenges, Romans sometimes employed textiles, heavy curtains, tapestries, and rugs, not only as decoration, but as practical tools to absorb sound and retain warmth. Interestingly, some villas featured sleeping arrangements designed for social or health reasons. For example, some Romans believed in the health benefits of airing out bedrooms, especially during hot months. Windows or doors were left open to allow fresh air to circulate, even as occupants slept. Others designed bedrooms with proximity to bathhouses, allowing residents to bathe before bed, a ritual thought to promote relaxation and better sleep. The importance of comfort in sleep architecture extended beyond the home. Public bath complexes, or therma, were social hubs where Romans often visited late in the day. These baths had reclining lounges and sometimes resting rooms where patrons could nap or socialize. The experience of bathing before sleep was intertwined with Roman concepts of hygiene and wellness, indicating that rest was not merely a passive act, but a ritual involving preparation and physical care. Even funerary architecture offers insights into Roman sleep culture. Tombs and mausoleums, often designed to resemble homes with beds and couches for the deceased, reflected the belief that death was a form of eternal sleep. The symbolism of sleep permeated Roman life and death, reinforcing the deep cultural connection between rest, architecture, and spirituality. In sum, the architecture of Roman sleep spaces, from cramped, noisy insulae rooms to elegant, purpose-built cubicula, shaped how people rested physically, socially, and psychologically. Space dictated not just comfort, but privacy, security, and spiritual safety. It influenced how deeply one could sleep, the rituals performed before rest, and the social dynamics even in the quietest moments. Understanding Roman bedrooms and architecture of rest reveals a civilization that thoughtfully integrated sleep into daily life and social order. The physical spaces crafted by builders and architects were as much a part of Roman sleep culture as the customs, beliefs, and rhythms that defined their nights. Through these spaces, we glimpse a society where rest was a carefully negotiated balance of nature, design, and tradition. The Roman day and night cycle. In the world of ancient Rome, the passage of time was intimately tied to the cycles of natural light, the rising and setting of the sun, the waxing and waning of the moon, and the shifting seasons that painted the sky with varying lengths of day and night. This rhythm of light and dark dictated more than just the hours of work and leisure. It deeply shaped how Romans structured their days and nights, including their unique approach to sleep. The Roman day was divided broadly into two main periods: the daylight hours, known as the dies, and the night, called the nox. Yet, unlike our modern concept of a consolidated 8-hour night's sleep, the Romans embraced a more segmented sleep pattern, heavily influenced by the natural ebb and flow of daylight. Morning began with the first light of dawn, a time when the city slowly stirred to life. As the sun rose, the streets of Rome filled with the bustling activity of merchants setting up their stalls, craftsmen opening their workshops, and citizens beginning their daily routines. The early hours, known as prima luce, or first light, were crucial for Romans to accomplish tasks before the midday heat became oppressive. But it was not only the daylight hours that dictated Roman behavior. The intense Mediterranean sun shaped a crucial part of their rest cycle, the meridiatio, or midday rest. This practice, somewhat akin to the modern siesta, was a culturally ingrained pause that allowed Romans to retreat from the heat, rest, and rejuvenate. Unlike the quick naps of today, the meridiatio was often a significant rest period, especially in summer months, lasting anywhere from half an hour to several hours. This midday rest was not a mere luxury, but a practical adaptation to the environment. The relentless heat of the Roman noon could be debilitating, making physical labor exhausting and dangerous. Families would retreat indoors, seeking the cool shade of their homes or villa gardens. Workers and slaves might find refuge in shaded courtyards or beneath colonnades. Even the great public baths offered a respite from the sun's intensity, providing spaces for rest and socializing during these slower hours. Following this midday break, Romans would resume their activities, often extending into the late afternoon and early evening. The vesper, or evening, was a vibrant time of day when the sun began its descent and temperatures became more bearable. Markets would bustle again, and families might gather for leisurely strolls or visits to friends. As darkness fell, the Romans entered a different rhythm, one marked by segmented sleep periods and rich nocturnal customs. The night was not a single, uninterrupted block of rest, but a cycle divided into two distinct phases. This biphasic sleep pattern began with the first sleep, prima vigilia, a period of slumber starting soon after dusk. The first sleep might last for several hours, during which the body relaxed, the mind drifted, and dreams began to surface. Romans believed dreams held spiritual and prophetic significance, often interpreting them as messages from the gods or signs about the future. This belief made the night a time of both rest and heightened awareness. Between the first and second sleep was a quiet waking period known as the inner vigil. During this interval, which could last an hour or more, Romans would rise from their beds and engage in various activities. This waking phase was neither restless insomnia nor hurried activity, but a deliberate, contemplative pause. Some Romans used this time for prayer or meditation, visiting household shrines to honor the gods or ancestors. Others might light an oil lamp and read or write by its gentle glow, cherishing this calm, solitary time. In some households, family members might share quiet conversations, reflect on the day, or plan for the morrow. The night was also a time for tending to personal hygiene, such as washing or grooming before returning to bed. For certain social classes, the intervigil could include visits from friends or neighbors, particularly in the wealthier homes where hospitality was a cherished value. This nocturnal socializing was a recognized aspect of Roman culture, fostering bonds and reinforcing social networks, even in the quiet hours. Following this waking period came the second sleep, secunda vigilia, the final phase of the night's rest. This period might last until the early hours before dawn, allowing Romans to complete their sleep cycle before the world awoke once more. This biphasic pattern was flexible, adapting to seasons, workloads, and personal preference, but it was a widespread norm embedded in Roman life. The structure of the Roman day and night cycle was also reflected in their calendars and timekeeping. The Romans divided the daylight period into 12 hours, which varied in length depending on the season, longer in summer, shorter in winter. Nighttime was similarly divided into 4 watches or vigiliae, each lasting about 3 hours. These watches were especially important for security, as guards and soldiers took turns monitoring the city or military camps. This division of night into watches reveals that Romans were attuned not only to their personal rhythms, but also to the collective need for safety and vigilance. The segmented sleep pattern allowed for rest without total unconsciousness, enabling people to respond quickly to emergencies such as fires, invasions, or other disturbances. Beyond practical considerations, the Roman understanding of day and night was also deeply spiritual. Nighttime was a liminal space where the boundaries between the mortal world and the divine blurred. The darkness was inhabited by spirits, gods, and dreams, making sleep a sacred act and the night a time of mystery and reverence. This spiritual dimension extended to the Roman festival calendar, where certain nights were set aside for rites honoring deities associated with sleep, death, and dreams. The Lemuria festival, for instance, involved rituals to appease restless spirits that might roam the night, reflecting anxieties and beliefs about the unseen world that intertwined with sleep practices. In essence, the Roman day and night cycle was a harmonious dance with nature and the cosmos. Their daily routines, marked by work, rest, socializing, and reflection, were carefully attuned to the sun's journey and the moon's phases. Sleep was not a single event but a rhythm woven into the fabric of life, shaped by architecture, climate, spirituality, and society. Understanding this cycle offers us a window into the ancient Roman worldview, where time was not simply measured but experienced, and where rest was a dynamic, multifaceted process integral to health, community, and the soul. Bedding and sleep comfort? In the ancient Roman world, the art of sleep was a reflection not only of biology and habit, but also of status, craftsmanship, and cultural values. Central to this experience was the bed, an object that, while seemingly simple, embodied a complex interplay of materials, construction techniques, and social meaning. To understand how Romans slept, one must first explore the beds they used, the bedding that dressed these resting places, and the very idea of comfort as it was known in antiquity. Roman beds, or lecti, came in a variety of forms, from the humble wooden frames of the common citizen to the elaborately decorated couches of the wealthy elite. The fundamental design of a Roman bed was often a low platform supported by legs, sometimes carved from wood, metal, or even stone. These frames were sturdy but varied widely depending on region, period, and wealth. At the simplest level, many ordinary Romans slept on beds crafted from local woods, oak, ash, or pine, assembled with mortise and tenon joints or metal fasteners. These beds were functional and durable, designed primarily to elevate the sleeper above the ground, which helped protect from drafts, insects, and dampness. The elevation of the body was a practical necessity as much as a comfort. For the affluent, however, beds became statements of luxury and refinement. Wealthy Romans adorned their lecti with intricately carved legs, often in the shape of lion's paws or scrolls, and inlaid with ivory, bronze, or precious metals. The craftsmanship reflected not only aesthetic taste, but also the owner's social standing and prosperity. Some beds were even fitted with canopies or curtains, allowing for privacy and warmth. Bedding itself was equally diverse and telling. The mattress, or colcida, was an essential component, usually stuffed with soft materials such as wool, feathers, straw, or reeds. Wool was especially prized for its insulating properties, retaining warmth in cooler seasons and allowing breathability during the summer months. Feathers, when available, offered a more luxurious softness, typically reserved for the upper classes. These mattresses were often placed on the bed frame with additional layers such as blankets and covers, called stragula or pallia, which could be woven from wool, linen, or cotton. The quality and fineness of these textiles varied widely. Linen, prized for its coolness and smoothness, was commonly used for sheets and undergarments, while wool provided warmth and durability. Pillows, or pulvinus, played a subtler role in Roman sleep. Unlike the plump, cushioned pillows familiar to modern sleepers, Roman pillows were generally smaller and firmer, often stuffed with herbs like lavender or chamomile to provide pleasant scents and purportedly aid relaxation. The use of scented pillows reveals a fascinating intersection of comfort, hygiene, and the therapeutic beliefs that pervaded Roman domestic life. For the lower classes, the bedding was modest and practical. A simple straw mattress might suffice, supplemented by a coarse wool blanket. The absence of elaborate bedding reflected economic realities, but also influenced sleep quality. Dampness, drafts, and overcrowding in insulae, apartment buildings, often meant that the poor endured less comfortable and less hygienic sleep environments. In contrast, the wealthy might possess multiple layers of bedding, finely embroidered linens, and luxurious feather-stuffed pillows. Their bedrooms, or cubicula, were often located in quieter parts of the house or villa, away from the noise and bustle of household activity, enhancing the quality of their rest. In these spaces, sleep was an experience of physical ease and sensory pleasure. The Romans also valued the social and cultural aspects of bedding. The lectus was not only a place for sleep, but also for reclining during meals, socializing, and receiving guests. This multifunctionality influenced bed design and placement, as comfort had to accommodate both rest and social display. Material culture and archaeological finds have enriched our understanding of these ancient objects. Excavations at Pompeii and Herculaneum have revealed fragments of wooden bed frames, textile impressions, and bedding remnants, providing direct evidence of construction and use. Wall paintings and mosaics also offer visual insights, depicting beds draped with fabrics and inhabited by reclining figures. Roman writers from Pliny the Elder to Martial occasionally comment on beds and sleep, sometimes humorously, sometimes philosophically. Pliny marveled at the softness of feather mattresses from Egypt, while Martial satirized the extravagance of those who owned beds so soft they could hardly rise in the morning. These literary glimpses reveal the cultural importance of bedding as both necessity and status symbol. Moreover, sleep comfort in Rome was linked to broader concepts of health and well-being. Physicians like Galen advised on the best sleeping positions and the use of herbal pillows to promote restful sleep and prevent ailments. The alignment of the body, ventilation of the bedroom, and avoidance of drafts were all considered important factors, showing that Romans understood sleep as a crucial component of physical balance. The social stratification, evident in bedding, also reflected larger inequalities in Roman society. Access to comfortable, hygienic sleep environments was a luxury not afforded to all. Slaves, for example, often slept in minimal accommodations, on the floors or simple wooden benches. Their rest was short and fragmented, dictated by the demands of their masters rather than their own rhythms. In summary, Roman beds and bedding offer a fascinating window into ancient life, revealing how comfort was constructed through materials, design, social meaning, and health practices. The bed was a nexus where the physical, social, and spiritual realms intersected, a place where status was displayed, the body was cared for, and the mysteries of sleep were embraced. The Roman siesta and midday rest. In the world of ancient Rome, where empires stretched from the arid sands of Egypt to the misty hills of Britannia, the rhythms of daily life were profoundly shaped by nature's rhythms, none more so than the sun itself. It was not merely a source of light, but a clock, a regulator of labor, meals, markets, and rest. Among the most telling examples of this sun-governed routine was the Roman practice of the meridiatio, a midday rest akin to the modern siesta. This daily pause, often underestimated in discussions of Roman life, reveals a culture deeply attuned to its environment, bodily needs, and philosophical ideas about balance and moderation. The meridiaceus, sometimes simply called the merides, Latin for midday, was more than a nap. It was a ritualized interlude in the day's activities, a moment of retreat as the sun reached its peak and the world slowed in response. Roman cities, bustling in the early morning with traders, senators, teachers, and craftsmen, would fall into a hush by early afternoon. Shops closed, markets emptied, and homes drew their shutters as the heat of the day grew intense. In Italy's Mediterranean climate, this midday pause was as practical as it was pleasurable. For many Romans, especially in the warmer months, the day began early, often before sunrise. Farmers worked their fields at dawn, merchants opened their stalls in the forum, and teachers began lessons with pupils while the air was still cool. Meals were eaten early as well. Ientaculum, the Roman breakfast, was typically light, a bit of bread, cheese, perhaps some olives. This allowed people to move swiftly into their morning labors. By midday, however, the sun bore down with considerable force. In cities like Rome, where stone buildings and paved roads absorbed and radiated heat, the temperature could become oppressive. Without air conditioning or widespread indoor cooling mechanisms, people relied on architecture and routine to cope. Thick walls, shaded courtyards, and open atriums provided some relief, but the best remedy was withdrawal, stepping away from tasks, seeking shade, and for many, indulging in sleep. This period of rest generally occurred after prandium, the Roman midday meal, which was also light, a continuation of the philosophy of moderation that underpinned much of Roman domestic life. After eating, Romans would recline on couches, often in dim or shaded rooms, and sleep. The siesta was typically short, rarely extending beyond an hour or two, but it was treasured. The siesta varied by social class. Wealthy Romans had the luxury of spacious homes with dedicated sleeping quarters or gardens with pergolas under which they could doze. Their time was their own, and rest was not only permitted but encouraged. Philosophers like Seneca and Pliny the Younger wrote about the importance of managing one's energy throughout the day, suggesting that even those engaged in intellectual or rhetorical pursuits recognized the wisdom of rest. Pliny the Younger, in his letters, describes the daily rhythms of his estate in Laurentum, where after a light lunch he would retire for a nap before returning to his writing or reading. For men like Pliny, the siesta was part of a well-regulated life, odium cum dignite, leisure with dignity, a time for the body to rejuvenate and the mind to gather itself for the latter half of the day. For laborers and tradesmen, rest was more constrained by obligation but not absent. Even in crowded insulae, or apartment blocks, workers would carve out a space and time for midday rest. A shaded step, a quiet corner, even lying on the floor with a tunic as a pillow. These brief escapes offered physical and mental relief. The harsh realities of Roman labor life meant that this nap might be the only true moment of personal time some individuals enjoyed. In the military, soldiers followed strict routines, and even they had prescribed periods of rest, though naps were not guaranteed depending on duties or campaigns. However, the general rule across the empire, whether in Rome, Carthage, or Antioch, was that the sun at its peak signaled a slowing of human activity. This cultural phenomenon wasn't confined to Italy. In provinces throughout the Mediterranean, the practice was observed with regional variations. In Roman North Africa, for instance, the heat was even more punishing. Roman villas there featured high ceilings, central courtyards with fountains, and thick clay walls, all designed to support restful indoor climates. The siesta, in such regions, was not only customary, but a survival strategy. The midday rest also had philosophical and spiritual undertones. In Roman thought, deeply influenced by Stoicism and other Hellenistic schools, balance was a cardinal virtue. Moderation of work, indulgence, and emotion were seen as essential to the good life. The siesta, as a pause in exertion, reflected a broader belief in equilibrium. Sleep, even in short doses, was medicinal, not merely for the body but for the soul. In urban centers, midday rest transformed the soundscape of cities. Where once there had been the clatter of hooves, the cries of merchants, and the buzz of conversation, there was instead stillness. The silence of the siesta was as much a part of the day as the bustle that preceded it. Even temples and religious centers observed this calm. Priests rested, and oracular consultations paused until the afternoon cooled. Despite the apparent tranquility, Not all Romans viewed the siesta as beneficial. The satirist Martial, known for his acerbic observations of Roman life, occasionally mocked those who indulged too deeply in rest. In one epigram, he refers to a man who seems to spend more time napping than working, hinting at idleness disguised as cultured leisure. Yet such criticism was more often reserved for excess than the practice itself. The nap was not controversial. It was universally acknowledged as sensible. There is evidence, too, that midday sleep intersected with Roman medical practice. Physicians like Galen recommended short naps to refresh the senses and restore bodily humors, especially when taken in moderation and in cool environments. However, he also warned that sleeping too long during the day could lead to sluggishness or mental dullness. His advice echoes much of Roman wisdom: balance in all things. Religious and superstitious beliefs also surrounded the siesta. The midday hour was sometimes associated with spiritual vulnerability. It was a time when the boundaries between the material and the divine seemed thinner. Dreams during siesta naps, like those at night, could be interpreted as messages or warnings. Some Romans believed that sleeping at certain hours left one open to visitations from spirits or gods, adding a layer of mystique to even a short rest. The importance of meridiatio endured well into the late Empire and influenced cultures far beyond Rome. As the Roman Empire expanded, so too did its customs. In Spain, southern France, and parts of the Middle East, the tradition of the midday nap persisted long after the fall of Rome, eventually evolving into the modern concept of the siesta, still practiced in parts of the world today. In this light, the Roman siesta is more than a quaint cultural habit. It represents a sophisticated understanding of the human body's needs, a social acknowledgement of rest as a communal right, and a reflection of a civilization in tune with the rhythms of its environment. For the ancient Romans, to rest was not laziness, it was wisdom. In the heat of a Roman noon, when sunlight poured down like molten gold, even the mighty paused. Senators reclined in shaded chambers, farmers withdrew beneath olive trees, children lay drowsy beside their mothers, and for a brief sacred spell, the empire slept. Sleeping postures and nighttime rituals. As the last embers of sunlight faded beyond the terracotta rooftops of Rome and the shadows stretched long across mosaic floors, a different rhythm took hold of the city, a slower, quieter pulse that marked the approach of night. With day's labor done and the forum silence beneath a purple sky, Roman households gradually turned inward, preparing for the restorative hours of sleep. Yet for the Romans, sleep was never merely the cessation of activity. It was a deeply personal ritual, touched by habit, belief, and the invisible threads that connected the waking world with the mysterious domains of dreams and the divine. Even the act of lying down for sleep was layered with meaning. Sleeping posture, in both practical and symbolic terms, held cultural significance. For the average Roman, sleep took place in a reclining position on their lectus cubicularis, the bedroom bed, or occasionally even on the lectus genialis, the marriage bed, reserved for the household's master and mistress. While we today think of sleeping on our sides or backs as simple preference, the Romans often associated certain postures with specific beliefs and purposes. Most Romans, particularly the upper class, were known to sleep on their sides, often curled slightly toward the fetal position, a posture considered both natural and modest. Physicians of the time, especially those following Galenic theory, argued that sleeping on one's right side aided digestion and balanced bodily humors. This belief was especially common after the evening meal, known as cena, which could be quite elaborate among the wealthy. As digestion was thought to require rest and balance, the posture one adopted could either support or disrupt the internal harmony so prized in Roman medical theory. Some Romans slept on their backs, especially in the early stages of rest, with their hands folded across their stomachs or chests. This was occasionally described in literature as the posture of philosophers and thinkers, men who drifted into dreams while reflecting on life, law, or the gods. However, sleeping on the back was not universally encouraged. Galen warned that it could disrupt the movement of phlegm and cause heavy breathing or even nightmares. Sleeping on the stomach, meanwhile, was rare and often discouraged. Roman physicians saw it as unnatural, potentially harmful to the organs, and symbolic of disorder. A person found sleeping in such a posture might be gently corrected by a household slave or nurse, or even teased by fellow sleepers in military barracks or communal housing. Posture, like every other element of Roman domestic life, was rarely left to chance. Before the Romans ever reclined into slumber, however, there was the matter of ritual, that subtle choreography of actions and beliefs intended to invite peace and ward off unrest. Bedtime in ancient Rome was not simply a matter of extinguishing the oil lamps. It was a time of quiet intention, reflection, and sometimes superstition. Among the upper classes, bedtime rituals often included bathing, either in private baths at home or at one of the many thermae, the public bathhouses that dotted the cityscape. The warm waters of the tepidarium, followed by the soothing heat of the caldarium, were thought to relax the muscles and prepare the body for rest. After bathing, men and women would don light sleep tunics, often made of linen or soft wool, depending on the season. The arrangement of the sleeping space itself reflected Roman ideals of order. Beds were tidied and smoothed by household servants or family members. The room would be dimmed, oil lamps trimmed to a soft flicker or extinguished entirely. In wealthier homes, aromatic oils or incense such as myrrh or frankincense might be burned to purify the air and calm the senses. A gentle scent was thought to soothe the mind, just as a glass of mulsum, a spiced honey wine, might be sipped to ease one's transition from wakefulness. Prayers were also an essential part of bedtime ritual. Romans were deeply spiritual, and many households maintained a lararium, a small domestic shrine to the Lares and Penaes, guardian spirits of the home and pantry. Before bed, offerings of wine, bread, or incense might be left on the shrine, accompanied by a whispered prayer for protection through the night. These prayers asked for safety from illness, fire, theft, and, perhaps most ominously, unwelcome dreams. Dreams held immense power in Roman thought. The boundary between sleep and the supernatural was thin. A dream could be a message from a deceased relative, a warning from a god, or a glimpse of the future. As such, rituals before sleep were sometimes performed to encourage good dreams and avoid malevolent ones. Some people slept with amulets under their pillows, small carved figures of Mercury, Somnus, or even phallic charms to repel evil. Others chanted verses or short poems believed to ward off nocturni, malevolent spirits that preyed on sleeping minds. For children, bedtime rituals were gentler, but no less steeped in tradition. Parents or caretakers would tell fables or stories from myth and history, often with moral lessons. Lullabies were sung in soft Latin verse, and children might fall asleep clutching a toy, a small wooden doll or wool-stuffed animal, handmade and imbued with love. The protective instinct of Roman mothers often extended into the night, with many choosing to co-sleep with their infants, especially in homes where cold temperatures or fears of illness loomed. Even in the military, where barracks offered little privacy, soldiers engaged in simple rituals before sleep. They cleaned their armor and weapons, folded their cloaks with care, and sometimes etched prayers into wooden tokens kept in their packs. Sleep in such places was often light and easily disturbed, yet the Roman soldier found ways to carve out brief moments of sacred rest. The nighttime silence of Rome was not absolute. Although many homes were dark and quiet, the streets often echoed with the distant voices of patrolmen, slaves attending late duties, or the occasional clatter of a cart. In the insulae, where poorer citizens lived in multi-story apartments, noises from above or below could disturb sleep. Yet even here, bedtime rituals persisted, however humble. A scrap of fabric pulled over the body, a whispered prayer to Fortuna, and a hope that the night would pass without hunger or fire. These were the nighttime rhythms of the common Roman. In elite households, the contrast was striking. Bedrooms were decorated with frescoes, scenes of Venus, Bacchus, or pastoral landscapes meant to encourage calm and beauty. Walls might be painted in deep reds or blues, with ceilings adorned in stars or vines. The bed itself, built of carved wood or metal, stood on legs of ivory or bronze. Soft bedding, rare and expensive, was stuffed with wool or feathers. A small table nearby held a lamp, a cup of wine, perhaps a scroll. Everything, even the architecture, whispered sleep. And then at last came the moment of stillness. The oil lamp was extinguished. The body, positioned just so, sank into the mattress. The mind drifted from the world of the forum and the marketplace into one of shadows, symbols, and stars. The Roman night was not without its fears. Fire, crime, illness, all could strike in darkness, but the rituals of sleep, practiced across classes and regions, were a kind of armor. They tethered the sleeper to tradition, to family, to the gods. And when morning came, with its pale gold light creeping over tiled roofs and city walls, the Romans would rise, not refreshed by accident, but by design. To sleep, for the ancient Romans, was not to surrender. It was to participate in a sacred cycle, part bodily necessity, part spiritual voyage. And in that quiet hour before dreams took hold, they prepared themselves, posture aligned, mind calmed, blessings whispered, for the mysteries of the night ahead. Night lighting and the use of lamps. As the Roman sun slipped beneath the horizon and the deep indigo of twilight cloaked the empire, the city of Rome did not fall entirely into darkness. It dimmed, it quieted, but it did not vanish. From the slums of the Subura to the patrician villas on the Palatine Hill, a soft glow emerged, unsteady, golden, and flickering from oil lamps and torchlight. In a world without electricity, without the hum of fluorescent bulbs or the tap of a phone screen, the Romans turned to fire, tamed, encased, and carefully managed to illuminate their nights. And in that gentle, flickering light, a society wrestled with the darkness, with its rhythms, dangers, and the fragile transition into sleep. Night lighting in ancient Rome was as much a matter of practicality as it was of ritual. Romans did not conquer darkness with a flood of artificial light. They danced with it. Lamps, lucernae, crafted from terracotta or bronze, were ubiquitous in Roman homes. They were simple in design, a shallow bowl with a spout for a linen wick fed by olive oil. Some were ornately decorated, bearing images of gods, gladiators, or daily life. Others were plain, functional, disposable. In wealthy households, silver or bronze lamps might hang from chains, gently swaying with drafts, casting dancing shadows across mosaic floors and painted walls. These lamps, though beautiful, were dim by modern standards. Their flame flickered, often sputtering with the quality of the oil, and their reach was limited to a few feet. For the average Roman, this meant living within shadows. The light followed them like a candle in a tunnel, always present but never overpowering. Entire households often gathered in the atrium or tablinum under the watchful glow of a central lamp. There, before retiring, they'd read, eat, or talk. The dimness encouraged reflection, slower speech, quieter motion. It dictated pace. It hinted at rest. For many, the act of lighting the evening lamp was a ritual in itself. Children were taught to handle the lamps carefully, as a spilled lamp meant not only a ruined wick, but also the possibility of fire, a very real and dangerous threat in tightly packed Roman insulae. In the countryside, oil was more plentiful and households larger, allowing for multiple lamps to light a villa rustica. But in the dense city quarters, light was often rationed, shared, or extinguished early to conserve oil and reduce risk. Street lighting in Rome, by contrast, was practically non-existent. There were no municipal lamps to guide one home. The vigiles, Rome's night watchmen, patrolled with torches and lanterns, but these were more for their own use than public benefit. Most Romans who ventured out after dark, slaves on errands, late-night revelers, or travelers heading to early morning markets, carried small handheld lamps or depended on the moon. Full moons were celebrated not just for their beauty, but for the ease they offered to nighttime movement. The darkness of the novilunium, the new moon, was feared, avoided. For many, it was when thieves struck, when spirits wandered, when the night became most truly unknown. And yet, even within the home, light was not always welcomed. Roman sleep patterns were different from ours. Historians suggest they followed what is now called segmented sleep, sleeping in two distinct phases, with a period of wakefulness in between. A Roman might go to bed shortly after sunset, sleep for a few hours, then rise in the middle of the night, perhaps to pray, write, have a quiet conversation, or even engage in intimacy, before returning to sleep until dawn. During this nocturnal interlude, light was sparse and intentional. A single lamp might be lit in a corner to offer just enough vision without fully waking the senses. Too much light, they believed, would disrupt the transition between sleep phases. The flame had to be soft, kind, almost shy. This segmented pattern was reflected in literature, too. In The Golden Ass by Apuleius, Nighttime scenes are often accompanied by soft lamplight, eerie glows, and moments of half wakefulness. Pliny the Elder, ever curious, wrote about how some people, especially writers and philosophers, preferred to work at night lamplight when the world was silent and the mind, perhaps, clearer. Seneca, too, often spoke of nighttime reflections, writing letters and essays while his household slept, but again, always under the hush of a single, well-tended lamp. But with the luxury of nightlight came superstition. Romans were deeply spiritual and cautious when it came to darkness. The night was when lemurs, the restless dead, were believed to roam. To keep them at bay, certain lamps were lit during household rituals, particularly the Lemuria, a festival held in May to appease angry spirits. The paterfamilias would rise at midnight, walk barefoot through the home, and cast black beans behind him while repeating incantations. All the while, lamps flickered to maintain a fragile boundary between the world of the living and the beyond. Light, in this way, was a protective veil, weak but vital. In temples, lamps also held sacred roles. The Vestal virgins maintained an eternal flame in the Temple of Vesta, never extinguished, always burning. It symbolized not only the goddess's presence, but the safety of the Roman state itself. In private homes, especially those of the wealthy, household gods called Lares and Penaes were kept in small shrines, and tiny lamps were lit before them during nightly prayers. These acts were not merely pious. They were comfort. They were a declaration against the unknown. Yet the same lamps that offered comfort could just as easily cause tragedy. Fires were a constant threat, especially in the crowded wooden insulae. A single overturned lamp could engulf an entire apartment block. The poet Juvenal mocked the danger of living in upper floors, where escape from fire was almost impossible. He described how even sleep was troubled by the fear of flame, a nighttime terror no lullaby could calm. For this reason, some Romans extinguished all lamps before sleeping. Others kept one low-burning flame in a niche, praying it would burn quietly through the night. Oil, too, was a concern. Olive oil was the most common fuel, but it was not cheap. In poorer homes, the quality of oil could be so poor that it smoked heavily, filled rooms with soot, and made breathing uncomfortable. Some improvised with animal fat or other flammables, but these burned unevenly and released foul smells. A poorly trimmed wick could blacken walls. A dripping lamp could stain a floor mosaic beyond repair. Light, then, was a luxury carefully weighed against risk. In time, the role of lighting evolved. By the late Empire, wealthier homes adopted more elaborate fixtures, candelabra, chandeliers of bronze, and wall sconces. But even then, the ambient light was nothing close to our modern standards. The Roman night remained a place of gentle pools of illumination and great stretches of shadow. It was, by necessity and design, a time for slowing down. And so, as the city of Rome drifted into slumber, its heartbeat softened by the hush of firelight and the quiet rustle of bedclothes. The people surrendered to the rhythms of nature, of tradition, and of myth. In that flickering light, they told stories, whispered prayers, watched shadows dance, and eventually closed their eyes. The night, after all, was not meant to be defeated, only endured, accompanied, and when possible, gently lit. Dreams and their significance. When night descended upon the Roman world, when the lamps were dimmed, the household gods saluted, and the streets of the eternal city slipped into murmured silence, it was not only rest the Romans sought. It was something more elusive, more mysterious, more divine. In sleep, the body was restored, yes, but to the Roman mind, it was the soul that traveled, gliding silently between worlds, past the veil of consciousness into the realm of dreams. There, they believed, messages could be found, prophecies whispered, warnings issued, and truths, hidden by daylight, finally revealed. Dreams were not dismissed in Roman culture. They were not random illusions of an overworked mind or idle fictions of the unconscious. Instead, they were treated as potent omens, encoded communiques from gods, spirits, and sometimes even the dead. A dream was never just a dream. It was a puzzle to be solved, a map to be interpreted, and sometimes a verdict to be feared. Sleep was a gateway to the numinous. To close one's eyes was to risk receiving a revelation. Many Romans held dreams in such high esteem that they structured their daily lives around their meaning. Waking up, a person might lie still in bed, eyes still closed, trying to remember each detail, the color of a tunic, the shape of a bird, a stranger's voice. A dream's value often depended on precision. Was the door open or closed? Was the sky clear or veiled in smoke? Every nuance could signal something different. The Roman poet Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, described dreams as arising from the underworld's twin gates, one of horn and one of ivory. Dreams from the gate of horn were true, while those from the gate of ivory were deceptive. The problem, of course, was that no dreamer ever knew from which gate their dream had come. For those with means, interpretation wasn't left to chance. Professional dream interpreters, known as coniactores or somniatores, were sought out. Men, and sometimes women, who specialized in unlocking the cryptic language of the sleeping mind. These interpreters often referenced established dream manuals like the Oneirocritica by Artemidorus of Daldis, a Greek author whose texts were widely circulated in the Roman world. In his writings, Artemidorus offered elaborate systems for analyzing dreams based on symbolism, profession, and social class. To dream of a river, for instance, could mean prosperity to a merchant, but danger to a soldier. To dream of climbing could mean elevation in status or a fall yet to come. But dreams were not only personal, they were deeply political and religious. Roman leaders often made public declarations based on dreams. Julius Caesar, famously warned in dreams before his assassination, is said to have brushed aside the omens. Calpurnia, his wife, dreamt of his murder the night before the Ides of March, begging him not to go to the Senate. Her dream, tragically, proved accurate. And Augustus, Rome's first emperor, interpreted his own dreams as signs of divine favor, reinforcing the idea that his rule was sanctioned by the gods themselves. Temples, too, served as spaces where sleep and dreams intertwined with worship. At the sanctuaries of healing gods like Asclepius to the Greeks, worshippers would undergo incubation, the practice of sleeping within a sacred precinct to receive divine messages in dreams. Pilgrims would cleanse themselves, make offerings, and lie down in designated areas of the temple, hoping the god would visit them in slumber and prescribe a cure or offer direction. The dreams that followed were taken seriously, written down, and sometimes even inscribed on temple walls as testimonies. Healing came not only through herbs and touch, but through the veiled sacred language of dreams. The Roman elite, ever anxious about omens and destiny, often kept personal dream diaries. Pliny the Younger, in his letters, described dreams with startling precision. Cicero, in his philosophical works, pondered whether dreams truly held meaning or were simply echoes of a troubled or excited mind. Yet even Cicero, skeptical as he was, acknowledged the power dreams held over the populace and their usefulness in shaping public perception. The line between private vision and public prophecy was often blurred. Interestingly, not all dreams were welcome. Nightmares were treated with alarm, often attributed to divine displeasure, malicious spirits, or unclean sleep. Some believed that demons, lemurs, or larvae could invade the mind through dreams, sowing fear and instability. Protective amulets, charms, or small statues of gods like Mercury or Bacchus were kept near beds to guard the sleeper. Even the placement of the bed could matter. Many Romans avoided sleeping with their heads facing west, a direction associated with death and decay. And there were practical preparations too. Before sleep, some Romans practiced calming rituals meant to encourage pleasant dreams and repel troubling visions. A light meal, the burning of incense, a short prayer to Somnus, the god of sleep, or to Fortuna for luck. Even whispering a beloved's name was thought to sweeten the journey into dreams. For children, mothers might place protective charms under pillows or tell calming stories of kind gods and gentle spirits to guide their dreams away from fear. Dreams also surfaced in the world of art and literature, suggesting how deeply embedded they were in the Roman psyche. In Virgil's Aeneid, dreams guide Aeneas through perilous moments, offering glimpses of his destiny. They were both plot device and spiritual compass. In dreams, heroes were warned, comforted, and sent on quests. Dreams could elevate a character or destroy them, never neutral, always powerful. Yet despite their reverence for dreams, Romans also feared the fine line between vision and madness. To see too much too clearly could be dangerous. There were whispers of those who had dreamed too deeply, of oracles who lost their minds, of priests who wandered into the woods after prophetic sleep, never to return. The dreamer was always at risk of being pulled too far, of losing themselves in the world behind the eyelids. Balance was essential. Sleep must refresh, not consume. Even the gods of sleep and dreams held this delicate duality. Somnus, depicted as a gentle winged figure reclining on a quiet bed of poppies, was both bringer of peace and potential messenger of fate. His brother, Mors, death, was never far behind. The Romans knew this. In art, they are sometimes shown side by side, indistinguishable but for subtle details. To sleep, after all, was to flirt with the threshold of the unknown. To dream was to open the door. As dawn's light spilled once more over Rome's rooftops, glinting off temples and tiles, dreams faded like mist. The dreamer, now awake, returned to the burdens of daylight. But the dream, its meaning, its message, lingered. In the marketplace, in the Senate, over cups of watered wine, dreams were retold, analyzed, feared. They remained part of life's architecture, stitched into the very fabric of how Romans understood fate, the gods, and themselves. For the ancient Romans, sleep was not simply escape or restoration. It was a sacred act. And dreams, the strange flickering visions of the night, were never dismissed as random shadows. They were signs, they were conversations with gods, and they were above all reminders that even in rest, the soul never truly sleeps. Religion, sleep, and nighttime omens. As the sun dipped beyond the horizon and twilight wrapped Rome in a silken hush, the ordinary world withdrew into shadows. Yet for the Romans, the night was not merely the absence of day. It was a sacred watchful realm governed by ritual, gods, and unseen forces. Beneath their tiled rooftops and frescoed ceilings, people prepared for sleep, not only with comfort in mind, but with reverence, precaution, and prayer. To close one's eyes in Rome was to enter a sacred domain, where religion and superstition touched every part of the sleeping ritual. The Roman world was one of omens and signs. Life was not regarded as a string of random events, but as a series of messages from the divine. Just as they scrutinized the flight of birds or the entrails of sacrificed animals, Romans also turned to the night and the realm of sleep as a source of divine insight. Every whisper in the dark, every creaking timber, every flicker of lamplight held meaning. And nowhere did this belief manifest more intimately than in how Romans approached their own sleep. Religious rituals were embedded into the winding down routines of the Roman day. At dusk, households often honored the lares and penates, the protective deities of the home and hearth. Small household altars glowed with offerings of wine, incense, or bits of food, and short prayers were murmured to secure protection through the vulnerable hours of sleep. Children were taught to nod respectfully toward these household spirits before bed. It was not simply ritual, it was insurance. Night was not empty. It was occupied by gods, spirits, and possibly more dangerous beings. The divine figure most directly associated with sleep was Somnus, the Roman god of sleep, who was often imagined as a quiet, gentle youth reclining with wings on his temples or shoulders. Though calm in demeanor, Somnus held immense power. To invoke his favor was to ask for peace in the night. To be ignored by him was to invite restlessness, unease, or something worse. Devout Romans sometimes offered prayers to Somnus before retiring, especially after troubled days or unsettling dreams. Sleep, though natural, was not taken for granted. It had to be protected. And yet, not all divine attention was comforting. Romans feared the presence of nocturnal spirits, both divine and malevolent. Chief among these were the lemures, the restless, wandering souls of the dead who had not received proper burial rites or who had died violently. These spirits were believed to roam the night, especially during certain times of the year, like the festival of Lemuria in May, when families performed rites to banish them from their homes. During this sacred observance, the head of the household would walk barefoot through the house at midnight, casting black beans over his shoulder and chanting sacred words to drive away these malevolent forces. The beans, believed to appease or distract the spirits, would be scattered 9 times, followed by the ritualistic clanging of bronze pots to scare them off. Night was also the domain of witches and spellcasters, figures deeply feared in Roman society. The strigae, winged hags associated with nocturnal attacks on infants, were objects of both fear and fascination. To protect against such evils, many Romans kept talismans or amulets in the sleeping quarters. One such charm, the fascinum, was shaped like a phallus and was believed to ward off the evil eye and other harmful influences. Hanging it near a bed, especially a child's, was common. Protective symbols and chants were also inscribed on tablets or spoken aloud before bed, reinforcing the idea that sleep was not passive. It was a battleground where sacred and profane forces contended. In wealthier homes, particularly those of priests or high-ranking officials, entire rooms were consecrated or ritually purified to make them suitable for sleeping. Some Romans practiced incubation, a sacred act of sleeping in a temple with the hope of receiving a dream message from a god, most commonly Aesculapius, the god of healing. The sick would lie down in sacred precincts after ritual washing and sacrifice, hoping the god would appear in a dream with a cure or instruction. This form of holy sleep blurred the line between physical rest and spiritual revelation, reinforcing the Roman idea that sleep was not merely biological, but deeply spiritual. Priests, known as augurs and haruspices, sometimes consulted dream reports alongside other omens. If a prominent individual had a troubling dream, particularly one involving death, fire, or unnatural events, it was not uncommon for public rituals to be performed to avert potential catastrophe. In this way, private dreams could become matters of civic concern. Sleep was not a strictly personal affair. It was watched and interpreted through the lens of religion, sometimes with implications for the entire community. The fear of nighttime omens also shaped Roman behaviors in practical ways. Many Romans avoided traveling at night, believing the dark streets to be especially dangerous, not only for thieves and accidents, but for numinous presences, spirits or minor deities that might lash out at the unaware. Temples and sacred sites were sometimes avoided after sundown unless one was engaged in specific ritual activity. The dark was sacred, but also unpredictable. Even natural occurrences during sleep were interpreted religiously. Sleepwalking, for instance, was often seen as a sign of spiritual possession or divine communication. A person who spoke aloud in sleep might be listened to closely, their words written down, preserved, or used to interpret divine will. Parents often paid close attention to children's nighttime murmurs, treating them as signs of purity or spiritual openness. Similarly, sudden awakenings, night sweats, or unusual dreams were not dismissed as medical symptoms alone. They might be regarded as warnings from the gods or consequences of religious neglect. The architecture of Roman homes even reflected these superstitions. Bedrooms, cubicula, were sometimes designed to be windowless or heavily curtained, not only to block light, but to guard the sleeper from ill-meaning spirits or watchful gods. Orientation mattered too. Some believed that sleeping facing north aligned the soul properly with the heavens, while facing west could invite death, echoing the Roman belief that the west was the direction of the underworld. Children were especially vulnerable, and Roman parents took great care to protect them at night. Lullabies often included invocations to protective deities, and infants might be swaddled with charms sewn into their blankets. Young children were discouraged from sleeping alone. In a society where mortality rates were high, especially among infants, the boundary between sleep and death was fragile, and religion offered the only comfort. Even sounds in the night were laced with spiritual meaning. An owl's hoot might be interpreted as a harbinger of death. The howl of a dog, particularly at night, was ominous. A lamp that flickered unexpectedly, a shadow on the wall, a door that creaked without wind, these were not dismissed. They were heeded. And sometimes they were answered with prayer, salt scattered across thresholds, or whispered appeals to the household gods. As the Roman night deepened and the city withdrew into its long sleep, the sacred and the profane mingled beneath the surface. Rome did not slumber in spiritual silence. It breathed with gods, myths, and omens. The faithful might whisper to the lares before closing their eyes. A soldier might clutch a charm under his tunic. A mother might trace symbols in the air above her child's bed. And when the first light of dawn crept in through the shutters, many would rise not just from rest, but from a night spent walking the thin, hallowed line between the mortal and the divine. To sleep in ancient Rome was never just to rest. It was an act of ritual and reverence, of fear and hope. Every snuffed lamp, every silent prayer, every whispered charm revealed a truth often lost in modern life, that the night is not empty. It is alive with spirit, watched over by gods, and echoing with the quiet voices of a world just beyond reach. Aromatics, oils, and sleep aids. As twilight spilled over terracotta rooftops and golden shadows lengthened across marble floors, the ancient Roman world prepared for the descent into night with more than silence and darkness. Sleep was not simply a bodily necessity, it was a sacred transition. And in a society where balance, health, and divine favor were intimately intertwined, Romans cultivated the art of falling asleep with deliberate care. Among the many tools at their disposal, the quiet magic of aromatics, oils, and herbal sleep aids took a central role. For the Roman sleeper, the world of scent was not luxury, it was ritual. From the patrician villas on Palatine Hill to the bustling insulae in the Subura district, Romans understood the power of the nose. Scent was a channel to calm the body and prepare the spirit. It could cleanse, protect, seduce, or soothe. And so, when the day's labor ended and the city began to settle into its nocturnal rhythm, many Romans turned to the quiet comforts of perfumed oils and fragrant herbs to ease themselves towards sleep. The centerpiece of this ritual was olive oil, a daily staple in Roman life, not only for cooking and lighting, but for personal hygiene. Romans used oil to cleanse and anoint their skin, rubbing it into their limbs and then scraping away the day's sweat and dust with a curved bronze tool called a strigil. But when night approached, olive oil was often enriched with fragrant essences, lavender, myrrh, chamomile, or rose, depending on availability, status, and intent. Lavender, imported from Gaul and cultivated in gardens across the empire, was one of the most beloved sleep aids. Its scent, soft and slightly medicinal, was believed to soothe nerves and promote peaceful dreams. Roman physicians like Galen recommended lavender as a mild sedative, particularly for those suffering from nervous disorders or troubled sleep. Wealthier citizens might keep lavender sachets in their sleeping quarters or add a few crushed sprigs to oil rubbed across the temples and neck before bed. Chamomile, wild and abundant, was similarly treasured. Brewed as an herbal infusion or steeped in oil, chamomile was used to quiet stomach discomfort, ease anxiety, and bring on a gentle drowsiness. Roman women, in particular, favored chamomile not only for its calming properties, but for the light floral scent it left in linens. Woven into wreaths or placed beside the bed, it offered both beauty and function. But not all Roman aromatics were soft and floral. Myrrh, deeply resinous and slightly bitter, held a place of honor in both temples and bedrooms. Burned as incense or infused into oil, myrrh was said to purify the air, dispel evil influences, and protect the soul during sleep, a time believed to leave one particularly vulnerable. Romans considered sleep a liminal state, not entirely disconnected from the spirit world, and strong protective scents helped guard against nightmares, intrusive spirits, or the malevolent gaze of envious eyes. The ritual of scent was not only medicinal, it was social, even sensual. Wealthy Romans might commission bespoke perfumes made by professional perfumers known as unguentarii, who crafted sleeping oils as carefully as one might compose a love poem. Blends of nard, spikenard, cinnamon, and cardamom were applied to the wrists, neck, and even bed linens. These exotic ingredients, often imported from the far reaches of the empire, India, Arabia, Egypt, turned the Roman bedroom into a miniature theater of the senses. For the working poor who lacked access to costly oils, more humble traditions prevailed. Dried bay leaves, associated with protection and clarity, might be burned in a small clay censer before sleep. Mint was tucked beneath pillows to invigorate the senses and ward off nightmares. Bundles of sage bound with twine were set near the bed as a protective charm. While not always rooted in medical science, these practices reflected a deeply intuitive understanding of the body and the power of the natural world to comfort or repel. Roman physicians also prescribed specific herbal remedies for sleep disturbances, which they recorded in painstaking detail. Galen and his predecessors recommended poppy-based elixirs, carefully measured doses of the opium poppy, dissolved in wine or honeyed syrup, to induce sleep in those suffering from chronic insomnia. The use of opiates was not taken lightly, and dosages were conservative, particularly for children or the elderly. These tinctures were known as diacodium and were sometimes used to quiet pain as much as to summon sleep. Another favorite sleep tonic was made from lettuce, which Roman writers often associated with drowsiness. Pliny the Elder noted that wild lettuce juice, when consumed at night, could cool the body and prepared for sleep. This belief even found expression in Roman meals. Light evening suppers often included lettuce leaves as a gentle nod to their soporific qualities. In gardens, lettuce was cultivated not only for food but for medicine, a living sleep aid growing at arm's reach. Of course, not all scents were embraced. Certain smells were feared. The stench of decay, mold, or stagnant water was seen not only as offensive but as dangerous, corrupting both the air and the soul. Roman homes often featured courtyards and ventilation designs that allowed for air circulation, and before bed, shutters might be opened briefly to let in fresh chase away malodorous vapors. To sleep in bad air was to invite nightmares, fevers, or worse. The power of scent extended beyond the individual sleeper. Sleeping quarters themselves were prepared like altars. Linen sheets and woven woolen blankets were occasionally misted with rosewater or orange blossom if available. On festive occasions, or when preparing for the arrival of a spouse or guest, the room might be fragranced with burning resins, dried herbs, or drops of oil smeared along the doorway. Sleep was personal, but it was also performative. It was a reflection of one's refinement, health, and alignment with nature and the gods. In temple precincts, where sacred sleep incubation was practiced, priests often burned aromatic resins continuously. The scent was not merely pleasing, it was transformative. It signaled that the space had become sacred, a threshold where divine and mortal might meet in dreams. Sleep, under these perfumed ceilings, became a form of communion. Roman soldiers, too, carried their own sleep traditions with them across the empire. In tents pitched along the Rhine or beneath the deserts of Syria, small pouches of herbs, rosemary, thyme, juniper, might be tucked beneath their cloaks. The scent of home, however faint, was a salve for exhaustion and fear. In the absence of temples or physicians, scent became solace. And perhaps most telling of all, mothers across the empire used gentle fragrances to soothe their children. Lavender water dabbed behind the ears, crushed fennel laid at the edge of a cot, warm oil rubbed into tiny feet. These rituals, passed down generation by generation, wove comfort into the very fabric of family life. They were acts of love, belief, and hope. Hope that sleep would come gently, that dreams would be kind, and that the world would still be whole come morning. In the end, the Romans did not separate scent from spirit or sleep from soul. They lived in a world fragrant with meaning. Each herb, each oil, each curl of smoke a message to the gods, or a shield against darkness. Their nighttime habits remind us that falling asleep was not a moment of surrender, but a sacred ritual, a carefully composed journey from the world of stone and empire into the soft, unseen realms of dream. And so, as the last lamps were dimmed and the murmurs of Rome slipped into silence, the air itself, laden with lavender, rose, and ancient resin, became the final companion to the Roman sleeper. The body stilled, the breath deepened, and beneath a sky stitched with stars, the scented veil of sleep descended. Superstitions and nighttime taboos. As the sun dipped below the 7 hills and the flickering lamps of Roman homes cast long shadows across tiled floors and frescoed walls, the ancient city did not fully rest. While the body might recline, the Roman mind, practical, pious, and perpetually alert to omens, entered a different realm, one ruled not by Caesar, but by fear, folklore, and ancient superstition. For the Romans, the nighttime hours were not simply dark. They were perilous, spiritually porous, and rife with the invisible. What passed in silence and shadow was governed by strict customs and whispered taboos. Night was a liminal zone in Roman belief, a time when boundaries dissolved between the living and the dead, the waking and the dreaming, the physical and the spiritual. Sleep, so natural and necessary, was also mysterious. To close one's eyes was to risk contact with forces beyond understanding. And so, to protect themselves from unseen threats, Romans developed a rich tapestry of superstitions and nighttime taboos that influenced everything from how they positioned their bodies to what they dared to dream. One of the most deeply held beliefs was that evil spirits roamed freely at night. These malevolent beings, restless ghosts, vindictive shades, and demonic forces were thought to be particularly drawn to the vulnerable, especially those asleep or sick. The Romans called these spirits larvae and lemurs, and they were feared not only for what they could do, but for when they did it. Under cover of night, when the city was least defended and the soul, untethered by sleep, could drift into dangerous territory. To ward off such spirits, Romans practiced a number of protective rituals before bed. It was common for families to sprinkle salt at the threshold of the sleeping quarters or place protective charms beneath pillows. Small amulets shaped like phalluses, known as fascina, or images of the god Mercury, who guided souls and repelled evil. The household lararium, or domestic shrine, might be quietly visited after the evening meal to offer a final prayer or libation to the household gods, the Lares and Penates, guardians of hearth and home. These nightly offerings were not simply expressions of gratitude, they were defenses. It was considered unlucky to sleep facing the door, a practice discouraged especially among the elderly and children. The Romans believed that sleeping in line with the threshold allowed spirits, or worse, death itself, to call one's soul away in the night. Facing a wall or sleeping with a protective object nearby, such as a piece of iron or a laurel branch, was thought to offer some defense. Laurel, sacred to Apollo, was believed to repel evil and lightning alike, a plant imbued with celestial protection. Another potent superstition involved the act of sleeping with the feet uncovered. Romans believed that exposing the soles could attract unwanted spirits, much like leaving a door ajar to the underworld. The body, like the home, was to be sealed against intrusion. Beds were not merely furniture, they were sanctuaries. Even the simple act of removing one's sandals before bed was done with quiet care, as sudden noise was said to alert wandering shades or disturb the restless dead. Perhaps most telling of Roman anxieties was their fraught relationship with dreams and omens. While dreams were sometimes seen as divine messages, especially those experienced during incubation or ritual sleep in sacred temples, more often, the average Roman viewed dreams with suspicion. A nightmare was not just a restless mind, it could be a warning, a curse, or a sign of a spiritual attack. Romans turned to dream interpreters, or coniectors, for help parsing these nocturnal messages. A dream of falling might signify loss of fortune. A dream of fire could predict conflict. A visit from a deceased relative could suggest unfinished business, or worse, a summons. But not all dreams were recorded. Some were purposefully forgotten. Waking at dawn, a Roman might whisper a troubling dream into running water or touch iron to their forehead while silently rejecting the vision. To speak a bad dream aloud was to give it life. Certain actions were also taboo at night, especially for women and the superstitious. Sweeping after sunset, for example, was considered deeply unlucky, as it could metaphorically sweep out wealth, health, or household spirits. The act of combing hair in the dark, especially in front of a mirror, was discouraged, believed to invite vanity and spirits alike. Mirrors, in fact, were viewed with a degree of unease at night. Reflections in the lamplight were considered unstable, revealing more than the eye could see. Many Romans covered or avoided mirrors after dusk. Food and drink were also touched by superstition. Eating garlic before sleep was thought to keep away malevolent forces due to its pungent scent and association with Mars, the god of war and protection. Conversely, drinking milk or wine late night was believed by some to weaken the mind's defenses against intrusive dreams. A particularly strong vintage of Falernian wine was said to open the soul to the divine, but also to spirits of the lower realms. For this reason, moderation in evening consumption was often encouraged, at least among the cautious. Pregnant women were particularly shielded by taboo. It was considered unlucky for a pregnant woman to sleep alone at night, as she might be visited by a nocturnal spirit that could influence the character or health of the unborn child. Protective amulets in the form of deities, Hercules for strength, Venus for beauty, Minerva for wisdom, were sometimes placed under the bed, alongside herbal bundles of rue, wormwood, and rosemary. And then there were the nighttime silences, deliberate, loaded, and sacred. Certain words were not to be spoken after dark, especially those invoking death, disease, or misfortune. Naming the dead was avoided unless in ritual context, as it could invite their presence. Instead, euphemisms were used: the past, the shade, he who sleeps beneath. Even references to nocturnal creatures, owls, bats, wolves, were softened or omitted. To speak plainly in the dark was to tempt the very forces one hoped to avoid. In rural areas, far from the watchful torches of the city, night held even more dread. farmers and shepherds would often light small fires or keep lanterns burning near their livestock, not only to ward off predators but spirits as well. Dogs were prized not only for their practical protection, but their supernatural vigilance. A dog's sudden howl at midnight was not merely unsettling, it was often interpreted as a sign of impending death or spiritual disturbance. Rituals to unbind the cry, such as knocking on wood or uttering a prayer to Janus, god of thresholds, were swiftly performed. Funeral customs, too, bled into the world of sleep. It was said that the souls of the unburied wandered at night, seeking rest they had been denied in life. These were among the most feared spirits, for they lacked peace and purpose. To encounter one in a dream was a dire omen. During the festival of Lemuria held in May, households would rise at midnight to cast black beans over their shoulders while chanting protective incantations, offerings to the restless dead meant to appease and send them away. Children were not exempt from these beliefs. Parents often taught their children bedtime prayers, but also cautionary tales, stories of night hags who stole breath, spirits who punished disobedience, and household gods who withdrew their favor when insulted. Though these tales often had moral purpose, they were deeply rooted in the broader Roman view of night as a domain of mystery, to be approached with reverence. In the glow of modern understanding, these superstitions may seem quaint or primitive, but in a world without electricity, where the stars were one's only map and illness or death could come suddenly in the night, such beliefs served a psychological purpose. They offered structure where there was uncertainty, protection where there was none. They turned the act of sleep, a daily surrender of the self, into a sacred rite, complete with rules, boundaries, and rituals. To sleep in ancient Rome was never simply to rest. It was to navigate a passage, invisible but perilous. It was to invite the unknown into one's home and hope that it left in peace. These superstitions, heavy with fear but rich with meaning, remind us that even in the great empire of law, architecture, and empire, there remained one domain untouched by reason, the night. And so, as the last whisper of prayer faded into the stillness, and the city of Rome lay cloaked in darkness, the people waited, not only for dreams, but for safety, for the passing of night without visitations, without omens, without whispers from the shadows. Only then, in the protective silence shaped by taboo and tradition, could the Roman sleeper truly surrender to sleep, coping with nightmares and insomnia. As night descended over ancient Rome, the city's restless souls often found sleep elusive or troubled by the shadows of their own minds. Unlike the serene, uninterrupted rest many imagine, the Roman night was frequently punctuated by unrest, nightmares that chilled the spirit, and insomnia that gnawed at the body's strength. Yet in a civilization known for its order, engineering, and legal systems, sleep was a domain both mysterious and deeply personal, shaped by beliefs, remedies, and rituals that combined the medical with the magical. The Romans recognized early on that sleep was not always a simple reprieve from daily toil. Some nights, the body lay still but the mind roamed, beset by terrifying dreams or a gnawing restlessness. The Latin word incubus itself, later popularized in folklore, hints at a demon believed to press down upon sleepers, causing nightmares and suffocation. These nightmares, called nocturna vis or night visions, were more than unpleasant dreams. They were thought to be signs of spiritual disturbance, divine warning, or an attack by unseen malevolent forces. In Roman medical thought, influenced heavily by Greek physicians such as Hippocrates and Galen, insomnia and nightmares were often linked to the imbalance of the four bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A surplus of black bile, associated with melancholy, was thought to clog the mind and cause disturbed sleep. The restless sleeper, therefore, was a body out of balance, requiring care both physical and spiritual. Physicians prescribed various remedies for troubled sleep. Warm baths infused with herbs such as chamomile and lavender were common, helping to relax the muscles and calm the mind before bed. Aromatic oils scented with rosemary, mint, or violet were applied to the temples or diffused in the bedroom, not only for their fragrance but for their believed medicinal properties. These oils were said to clear the head and banish restless thoughts. Yet medical cures were rarely sufficient on their own. The Romans lived in a world where the boundary between medicine and magic was porous. To combat nightmares, one might consult a dream interpreter, one iromancer, who could decipher whether a disturbing vision was an omen, a curse, or a message to be heeded. If the dream was malevolent, ritualistic countermeasures were employed. These could range from the recitation of protective prayers and incantations to the use of talismans or charms placed under the pillow. Among the most common magical remedies was the use of amulets bearing inscriptions or symbols designed to repel evil. The fascinum, a small phallic charm, was believed to protect the wearer or sleeper from the evil eye, a malevolent glare thought capable of causing harm, illness, or restless sleep. The evil eye was a pervasive fear, and those suffering from insomnia or frequent nightmares might carry or sleep near such charms as a safeguard. In addition to amulets, ritual baths were often performed. These were not simple cleansings, but sacred acts meant to purify the body and spirit. Bathing in water mixed with herbs like rue, wormwood, or vervain was thought to cleanse the sleeper of any negative spiritual residue acquired during the day or in past dreams. Some would even sprinkle consecrated water, blessed by a priest or through a specific rite, around the bed to form a protective barrier against nocturnal harm. The use of herbal remedies was widespread. Poppies and their derivatives, precursors to opiates, were known and sometimes used for their sedative qualities, though with caution. More commonly, teas and infusions of plants like lettuce, melissa, lemon balm, and valerian root were consumed in the evening. These herbs were believed to soothe the nervous system, quiet the mind, and ease the transition into sleep. Garden herbs grown in household courtyards became a source of these natural remedies, linking domestic life with health and ritual. Another intriguing aspect of coping with troubled sleep was the role of prayer and religious observance. Before retiring, many Romans would offer a small libation or prayer to Somnus, the god of sleep, and his children, the Onoroi, who personified dreams. These prayers were not casual, but performed with solemnity and hope, invoking divine favor for a peaceful night free of torment. If sleep proved elusive, it was considered a sign of divine displeasure or spiritual imbalance, prompting further acts of devotion. Insomnia, or insomnia, as the Romans called it, was sometimes viewed with a mixture of medical concern and spiritual caution. Chronic sleeplessness was believed to weaken the soul's defenses, making the individual vulnerable to disease and spiritual attack. The restless sleeper was said to be in danger not only of physical exhaustion, but of the wandering soul being lost to the night. To prevent this, the Romans sometimes employed protective rituals, such as lighting a night lamp or leaving a small flame burning throughout the night. Fire was a symbol of life and protection, thought to keep away shadows and spirits. In the realm of folklore, some stories emerged about night demons or spirits that caused insomnia or nightmares. The Lamia, a female spirit or witch figure, was said to haunt sleepers, especially children and young women, stealing breath and causing terrifying visions. To guard against such entities, certain rituals involved the use of iron, a metal believed to repel evil, and loud noises, such as clapping or knocking on wood, to scare away the malevolent presences. Sleep paralysis, the sensation of being unable to move while sensing a presence, was probably experienced as it is today, but the Romans interpreted it through the lens of their spiritual beliefs. This terrifying state was attributed to visits from incubi or succubi, spirits thought to sit upon the chest of sleepers, bringing nightmares and suffocation. Those suffering from repeated episodes might seek the help of magicians or priests who could perform exorcisms or prescribe charms to break the spell. For those with persistent sleeplessness, lifestyle and environment were also factors to consider. Roman medical writers advised moderation in diet and physical activity, especially late in the day, to encourage restful sleep. The timing of meals, the avoidance of excessive alcohol, and maintaining a calm household environment were practical measures recommended by physicians such as Galen. The ideal sleeping environment was cool, dark, and quiet, conditions not always easy to achieve in a bustling city. For many, sleep troubles were a family concern. Roman households often practiced communal sleeping arrangements, especially among the lower classes, which sometimes mitigated fears of isolation in the night. Yet this closeness was a double-edged sword. A restless sleeper could disturb the entire household, while fears of shared nightmares or curses lingered. Protective rituals often involved the whole family: prayers at dusk, the placement of charms in communal areas, and shared storytelling to dispel fear. Despite these challenges, sleep remained a vital part of Roman life. The great orators, generals, and statesmen of the era recognized the need to balance ambition with rest. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, advised care in maintaining sleep hygiene and lamented the many who sacrificed rest for the sake of work or pleasure. He emphasized that a sound night's sleep was necessary for health and vigor, a sentiment echoed by many Roman thinkers. In the quiet hours when the city's candles guttered low and the noise of the forum faded into distant echoes, the Romans, like us, sought solace in the hope of sleep's embrace. When it came, sleep offered a fragile peace. When it fled, the long night stretched before them, fraught with the invisible terrors of dreams, spirits, and shadows. Through a blend of medicine, magic, and ritual, the Romans faced these challenges with a profound respect for the mysteries of the night and the fragile nature of rest. Their efforts to overcome nightmares and insomnia remind us that the human struggle to find peaceful sleep is ancient and universal. The fears that stir in the dark, the rituals that soothe the mind, the search for balance, these are echoes from a world both distant and strikingly familiar. In the silence of the Roman night, we hear the whispered hopes of all who have ever lain awake, longing for the dawn. Social class and sleep quality. In ancient Rome, as in many societies, the rhythms of sleep were deeply entangled with the structures of social hierarchy. The quality, quantity, and even the very experience of sleep varied dramatically depending on one's place within the sprawling Roman social order. From the patrician elite ensconced in their sprawling urban villas and countryside estates, to the hardworking plebeians inhabiting crowded insulae, down to the slaves who toiled ceaselessly in service of their masters, sleep was an intimate reflection of status and privilege, or the cruel lack thereof. For the patricians, the aristocratic families who formed the ruling class, sleep was a luxury closely guarded and highly valued. These were men and women whose wealth granted them not only the comfort of expansive homes, but also the leisure to prioritize rest as an essential component of health and vigor. Their bedrooms, or cubicula, were often richly appointed spaces, designed with both function and refinement in mind. Beds were elevated, cushioned with mattresses stuffed with wool or feathers, and draped with curtains to shield sleepers from drafts and prying eyes. In these private chambers, tranquility could be cultivated, a sanctuary from the noise of the city and the demands of public life. The patrician sleep environment was typically insulated from the harsher elements that plagued the majority of Romans. Wealth afforded them control over heating, such as the use of hypocaust systems in some homes, which warmed the floors and walls during cold months, making sleep more comfortable. Their bedding was replaced and maintained regularly, and a variety of scented oils, herbs, and rituals were employed to promote restful sleep and ward off nightmares, luxury practices often beyond the reach of the lower classes. In contrast, the plebeians, Rome's common citizens, faced a far more precarious relationship with sleep. Most plebeians lived in densely packed apartment blocks called insulae, often cramped and poorly ventilated. These buildings, sometimes several stories high, were constructed hastily and cheaply, with fire hazards and structural weaknesses that made life within them precarious. Noise and light pollution from the bustling streets below frequently penetrated these humble abodes, disturbing the hours of darkness. Families often shared single rooms or beds, and privacy was a rarity. The plebeian bed itself was a more modest affair: simple wooden frames, thin mattresses, or even just straw laid upon the floor. Bedding was often threadbare and hard to keep clean, especially in the tight quarters of the insula. The city's poor were more exposed to cold and damp, which could aggravate restlessness and discomfort. Their nights were often punctuated by worries about work, food, and security that weighed heavily on the mind, further diminishing sleep quality. Plebeians might not have had access to the aromatic oils or elaborate rituals of the wealthy, but they did employ practical methods to encourage rest. A warm bath at a public thermae or balneum could soothe muscles and provide a brief respite from daily hardship. Many plebeians would retire early, constrained by laborious days and limited leisure, but the brevity and quality of their sleep was often compromised by the physical and psychological stresses of their environment. Below even the plebeians were the slaves, an essential yet tragic underclass whose experience of sleep was marked by deprivation and discipline. Slaves made up a significant portion of Rome's population, performing tasks ranging from domestic service to manual labor, often working long hours under strict supervision. Their sleeping quarters were usually cramped, shared with many others, and poorly furnished. Unlike the patricians, slaves seldom enjoyed private bedrooms. Instead, they slept in communal spaces, such as small rooms or corners near their place of work, or in servant quarters at the back of large homes. The slave's bed was often little more than a thin pallet or a bundle of straw on a hard floor. Comfort and cleanliness were minimal concerns for their masters, and slaves had to endure cold nights with scant protection. Their sleep was frequently interrupted by their duties, rising early to prepare for work, answering the commands of their owners, or tending to household needs throughout the night. The constant threat of punishment or oversight meant that sleep for a slave was both precious and precarious, rarely afforded the untroubled rest enjoyed by those above them. Moreover, the psychological weight borne by slaves, deprivation of freedom, the fear of violence, separation from family, could manifest as disturbed sleep or nightmares. While some might find solace in shared companionship or brief moments of privacy, for many, sleep was a fragile respite in a life dominated by toil and subjugation. Sleep patterns themselves also varied with social standing. The elite often maintained a segmented sleep schedule, dividing the night into phases of rest, wakefulness, and sometimes quiet study or conversation. This pattern was reflective of a life that allowed greater control over time. In contrast, slaves and plebeians were bound more strictly by the rhythms imposed by work and public order. For them, sleep was often a continuous but short necessity, squeezed into the margins of an exhausting day. In terms of sleep duration, patricians likely enjoyed longer, more consistent nights of rest. They could afford the luxury of midday naps or meridiatia, a practice embraced by many Romans, but easier for those not laboring outdoors or at physical tasks. The plebeians might occasionally indulge in such rest, but their capacity was limited by economic pressures and working hours. Slaves, by contrast, had little opportunity for rest beyond the few hours allotted by their masters and the demands of their labor. It is also worth noting the differing access to remedies and rituals that affected sleep quality. Patricians could employ physicians, pharmacists, and spiritual advisors to manage sleep disturbances using exotic herbs, incense, and oils. Plebeians relied on more modest folk remedies, herbs grown in small gardens or procured from local markets, simple prayers, and perhaps the communal advice of neighbors. Slaves, while sometimes excluded from elaborate rituals, could participate in folk magic or clandestine practices, using charms or incantations whispered in secret to protect themselves during vulnerable hours. The very architecture of Roman homes reflected social disparities in sleep environments. Patrician houses often had separate rooms dedicated to sleeping, quiet, and privacy, situated away from noisy atriums or bustling kitchens. The wealthy could afford heavy curtains and wooden shutters to keep out cold and noise. Plebeian insulae, by contrast, were multi-use spaces with little separation between cooking, eating, and sleeping areas. Light, sound, and heat penetrated more freely, eroding the sanctuary that sleep requires. Slaves' quarters were often near stables, kitchens, or storage areas, places of noise and bustle even after dark. This proximity made deep rest difficult, contributing to fragmented and shallow sleep. The sense of security, a crucial foundation for good sleep, was scarce, as slaves remained vulnerable to punishment or abrupt summons from their owners at any hour. Despite these stark differences, there were moments when sleep bridged social divides. Festivals and religious holidays sometimes allowed slaves to rest more freely, and public baths were spaces where the tired masses, regardless of rank, sought relaxation. The human need for rest, the universal pull of night, transcended social boundaries, even as the experience of sleep itself was so unevenly distributed. In reflecting on the sleep of ancient Romans, we see more than just the mechanics of rest. we glimpse a society whose divisions reached even into the intimate hours of darkness. Sleep was a mirror of inequality, a daily ritual shaped by wealth, power, and status. The patrician's peaceful night contrasted sharply with the restless nights of plebeians and the broken slumber of slaves. Each experience a testament to the way social order governed even the most basic human needs. Yet the night also carried a quiet hope for renewal. For all Romans, regardless of station, sleep remained a vital refuge, a temporary escape from the burdens of the day, and a necessary preparation for what tomorrow might bring. The disparity in sleep quality underscores the profound influence of social class on the human condition in ancient Rome, reminding us that the luxury of rest, so often taken for granted, was itself a marker of privilege, power, and survival. In this glimpse into the varied worlds of Roman sleepers, we find an enduring truth. While the conditions of our rest may differ, the essential human yearning for peaceful sleep remains constant across time and status, weaving together the stories of the mighty and the meek alike under the same quiet stars. Sleep habits of Roman children. In the intimate spaces of the Roman household, the sleep habits of children revealed a world both tender and telling, one shaped by family, culture, and the ever-present rhythms of daily life. Unlike the adults who navigated rigid social roles and responsibilities, children occupied a liminal space where care and discipline intertwined. Their nights were cocooned in rituals, gentle attention, and practical concerns, all framed by the realities of ancient Roman domestic life. To understand how Roman children slept is to glimpse not only the contours of childhood, but also the values and hopes invested by families in their young. From birth, Roman children were closely attended to by their mothers, wet nurses, or household slaves charged with their care. Infants did not sleep alone. Rather, they were held, cradled, or laid close to their caregivers, nestled in swaddling bands or simple linen wraps designed to offer comfort and warmth. The importance of warmth cannot be overstated in a world where central heating was a luxury reserved for the wealthy. The nights could be cold and damp, especially in the city's stone homes or the countryside, and the proximity of a caregiver was often the only shield against chill and fear. Roman infants commonly shared sleeping spaces with their mothers, sometimes in the same bed, other times in specially designed cradles called calae. These cradles were often simple wooden constructs, sometimes swung gently to lull the baby to sleep, a practice echoing the universal human impulse to soothe through motion. Swaddling was widespread, reflecting beliefs both practical and symbolic, intended to calm the infant and protect fragile limbs, though the tightness of binding could vary by family custom. The household itself played a vital role in framing the infant's and child's sleep environment. In wealthier homes, a child's sleeping quarters might be part of a larger private room set aside from the hustle of the atrium and kitchen, a space filled with soft textiles and comforting objects. In poorer homes, children slept wherever space allowed, in the same crowded rooms as parents, siblings, or even among the household slaves. Privacy was a rare luxury, but the bonds of proximity fostered a kind of warmth and security. As children grew beyond infancy, their sleep arrangements evolved, but the overarching pattern of closeness often remained. Siblings frequently shared beds, and older children might sleep on mats or pallets nearby, under the watchful eyes of parents or slaves. The family bed, rather than being the rare domain of intimacy it is today, was a communal place where bodies pressed close against one another in the gathering dusk. This collective sleeping arrangement served practical needs, saving heat, ensuring safety, and reinforcing familial ties in the dark hours. Nighttime for Roman children was not simply about sleep. It was also suffused with rituals and customs intended to protect and nurture. The evening might begin with prayers or offerings to household gods, Lares and Penates, who were believed to watch over the family and its members through the night. Parents often invoked these deities for protection against evil spirits, bad dreams, and misfortune. Small figurines or amulets could be placed near a child's bed, serving as talismans against unseen dangers that lurked in the shadows. Children's sleep was also influenced by the broader Roman concern with dreams and omens. Parents were attentive to the content of their children's sleep, interpreting restless movements or cries as messages or signs to be heeded. Nightmares, while feared, were met with remedies both practical and magical, a mixture of soothing words, herbal infusions, or whispered incantations designed to calm the troubled soul. Herbs played a discreet but meaningful role in children's sleep rituals. Mild infusions of calming plants such as lavender or chamomile might be given before bedtime to ease anxiety or restlessness. Though medical knowledge was limited, the Roman world understood that nature's gifts could soothe the body and mind, and these simple remedies were handed down through generations. The concept of a bedtime as a strict hour was less rigid than in modern times. Children's days were structured by daylight and family activity, and as such, bedtime was flexible, shaped by the rhythms of the household. In rural settings, children often rose early with the sun to help with chores, returning exhausted at nightfall and sleeping deeply in unstructured cycles. In urban environments, noise, light, and the hustle of city life could complicate sleep. Yet the family unit worked to create as peaceful an environment as possible. Roman children also experienced the social rites of sleep. The presence of caregivers was crucial not only for physical needs, but for emotional security. The human touch, the soft voice, and the steady heartbeat nearby were anchors in a world that could otherwise be overwhelming. Mothers and nurses might sing lullabies or tell stories, weaving oral traditions that soothed as much as they taught. The lull of voice and the steady rhythm of repetition became a bridge from wakefulness to sleep, binding child and caretaker in shared calm. For the wealthy, sleep could be a moment of luxury even for children. Some patrician families commissioned elaborate beds, sometimes adorned with rich textiles and delicate embroidery. Pillows stuffed with feathers or wool were used to elevate heads, and mattresses might be layered thickly for softness. Yet even in these privileged settings, sleep remained a deeply social act, often a family gathering as night drew close, a moment to share warmth and quiet before the demands of the next day. The Roman approach to children's sleep also encompassed the idea of preparation for the future. Rest was seen as essential to growth, health, and learning. In a society that prized discipline and education, ensuring that children had restorative sleep was both a practical and moral concern. Parents understood that without sufficient rest, the vigor and spirit needed for the responsibilities of adulthood would be compromised. Moreover, sleep was entwined with childhood vulnerability and protection. The night was a time of potential threats, real and imagined, from wild animals in rural areas to thieves and disasters in the city. The family's protective measures, from physical closeness to rituals and charms, served as both practical safeguards and symbolic defenses, offering comfort against the unknown. The intersection of childhood innocence and adult care created a unique dynamic in Roman sleep habits. Children were cherished yet disciplined, comforted yet prepared for the harshness of the world. Their sleep was a daily enactment of this balance, a fragile, tender time where nurture and tradition met the realities of life in ancient Rome. In reflecting on these habits, one sees a world both distant and familiar. The yearning for security, the importance of family, and the gentle routines that cradle a child into sleep are timeless themes. Yet the particulars, the close quarters, the swaddling bands, the prayers to household gods, remind us of the ancient rhythms that shaped the lives of Roman children and the delicate nightscapes in which their dreams took flight. Thus, the sleep of Roman children was not merely a biological necessity, but a rich cultural moment, steeped in ritual, care, and hope. It was in these quiet hours that the future citizens of Rome found rest, protection, and the faint whispers of the world that awaited them with the dawn. The role of slaves and night watch. In the dim light of the Roman household after dusk, life did not simply retreat into silence. While the city around slumbered and the wealthy retreated to their chambers, a different rhythm governed the lives of slaves and household staff, those who remained awake, vigilant, and ready. The complex tapestry of Roman domestic life was woven with many threads, but none so quietly indispensable as the presence of slaves whose duties extended well into the night. Their sleep habits, or more often their sacrifice of sleep, reveal a hidden world of labor, vigilance, and survival that shaped the very fabric of Roman nights. The household slave was bound not only by duty, but by the unyielding demands of the family they served. Nighttime brought with it a range of responsibilities, some practical, others protective, all essential to maintaining order and security in a sprawling home. The patrician domus, with its labyrinthine rooms, peristyles, and atria, required careful oversight after the household had withdrawn from public view. It was the slaves who ensured that the household continued to function smoothly, even as most others slept. Among these nocturnal duties, the role of the night watch was paramount. In an era before electric lighting and modern security systems, darkness was a time of vulnerability. Theft, fire, or invasion by hostile forces were ever-present threats. Slaves assigned as night watchmen took on the heavy burden of guarding their master's property and family, patrolling corridors, opening and closing doors, and monitoring for signs of danger. Their vigilance was a quiet sentinel against chaos, a watchful eye ensuring that the domus remained a sanctuary through the hours of darkness. These night watch slaves often slept little, if at all, during their shifts. Their rest was fragmented, taken in short intervals when they could briefly settle in a corner or on a bench, ready to spring back to action at the slightest alarm. The contrast between their wakefulness and the deep sleep of their masters and the children they guarded was stark, a reminder of the sharp social divisions that structured Roman life. Beyond the watchmen, other household slaves had duties that interrupted or reshaped their own sleep. The kitchen slaves, for example, might be roused late into the night to prepare food for early risers or to tend to embers in the hearth. Those charged with caring for children remained alert to cries and needs, standing ready to soothe or intervene. Others might be tasked with cleaning or organizing spaces during quiet hours, a testament to the ceaseless demands of the household machinery. Slave quarters were often cramped, located in the less desirable parts of the home or even in adjacent buildings. Privacy was scarce, and sleep was frequently shared in tight communal spaces, making uninterrupted rest difficult. Yet these quarters were also places of camaraderie and refuge, where bonds formed through shared hardship and mutual support. In these dim rooms, slaves might exchange stories, quietly plan, or simply rest their weary bodies, even as their minds remained alert to the demands of dawn. The economic realities of Roman slavery meant that many slaves were expected to work long hours with little regard for their own well-being. Sleep deprivation was a common consequence, sometimes deliberately imposed as a form of control or discipline. A slave's failure to perform duties during the night could result in punishment, a grim motivation to remain ever watchful despite exhaustion. This harshness underscores the cruel dimensions of Roman domestic order, where the comfort of the elite was often bought at the cost of those who served. Yet, within this rigid structure, there were moments of complexity and even humanity. Some slaves were trusted with intimate tasks, entrusted with secrets or important messages under the cloak of night. Their presence was both a safeguard and a symbol of the household's power, reflecting a relationship of dependence that was never entirely one-sided. Slaves often knew the rhythms and vulnerabilities of the family better than anyone, making their vigilance at night both a practical necessity and an expression of a subtle, if unequal, bond. Nighttime rituals within the household also shaped the slave's experience of sleep. In some families, slaves participated in the prayers and offerings to the household gods, sharing in a collective hope for protection and peace. The rituals that marked the transition from day to night, the extinguishing of lamps, the closing of doors, the recitation of invocations, were as much a part of slave life as they were of the master's. These moments of shared belief offered a fragile thread of connection across social divides. The influence of superstition and religion was particularly pronounced in the night watchman's role. Many believed that the night was a liminal time when spirits, gods, and demons roamed closer to the mortal world. The presence of a vigilant slave was thought to ward off malevolent forces, with rituals sometimes performed to protect the household. Amulets, charms, and whispered prayers accompanied the watchman's rounds, a blend of practical security and spiritual safeguarding. Even the very design of the Roman home reflected concerns about night and sleep. Slave quarters were often arranged near the kitchens or service areas, providing proximity to duties, but also isolating slaves from the family's private chambers. This separation mirrored the social hierarchy, but also created a kind of rhythm. Masters retreated to rest, while slaves moved through the shadows, their bodies and minds engaged in ceaseless labor. Despite the demands of night watch and other duties, some slaves found ways to carve out moments of rest. The ancient world recognized, in its limited way, that sleep was necessary even for the most burdened. Slaves might sleep in shifts, rotating duties to allow brief respite. They might also take advantage of times when the household was quiet, during festivals, holidays, or when masters were away, to catch up on much-needed rest. Yet such moments were always provisional, shadowed by the ever-present expectation of service. The contrast between the sleep of masters and slaves also reflects broader themes in Roman society, questions of power, control, and survival. For the patrician family, sleep was a time of restoration and privacy, a retreat from the public world, and a preparation for the next day's duties. For the slave, sleep was a precious commodity, hard-won and often interrupted, lived in the margins of a system that demanded unceasing obedience. This disparity underscores the layered nature of Roman nights, where the peaceful silence of the elite's bedrooms was mirrored by the restless vigilance of those who ensured that peace. The household was a microcosm of Roman society, writ small, complex, hierarchical, and defined by roles that dictated who could rest fully and who could only doze lightly, alert to every sound. In exploring the sleep habits and nighttime roles of slaves, we gain a more complete understanding of ancient Rome's rhythms, not just the grandeur of public life or the rituals of the elite, but the quiet endurance and unseen labor that sustained it all. The watchful eyes in the shadows, the interrupted sleep, and the whispered prayers remind us that every civilization rests on the shoulders of those who toil unseen, especially in the stillness of night. Thus, the night in ancient Rome was not merely a time for sleep, but a theater of vigilance, service, and survival, where the lines between wakefulness and rest were drawn sharply by social status. The slave sacrifices under the cover of darkness ensured that the household could face each dawn renewed, a poignant testament to the silent labor behind the city's shining facade. Hygiene and sleep preparation. In the gentle fading light of a Roman evening, the transition from wakefulness to sleep was often accompanied by a ritual of cleansing, a daily passage from the bustle of the day into the calm of night. For the ancient Romans, hygiene was not simply about physical cleanliness. It was a complex, deeply ingrained practice that intertwined health, comfort, social status, and spiritual well-being. Before the household settled into rest, the careful preparation of the body for sleep formed an essential, sometimes luxurious part of Roman life. The importance of bathing in Roman culture cannot be overstated. Though we often picture the grand public baths, these communal spaces were more than just centers of cleanliness. They were social hubs, places of conversation, relaxation, and even business. Yet, the bathing ritual extended into the private sphere of the home, especially as night approached. For those who could afford it, the evening bath was a deliberate preparation for sleep, a way to shed the grime and stresses of the day and invite restful calm. Bathing in the late afternoon or early evening was often the final act before donning night clothes and retreating to one's cubiculum or bedroom. The bath itself was a multi-part affair, beginning with a warm soak in the caldarium or hot bath, followed by the cooler frigidarium, and finished with the tepidarium, a warm room to restore balance to the body's temperature. These carefully calibrated shifts in temperature were believed to cleanse not only the skin, but also to relax the muscles and prepare the mind for sleep. The sensation of warm water flowing over the body, combined with the fragrant oils and scrapers, strigils, used to remove dirt and sweat, left the bather refreshed and soothed. For those unable to access public or private baths daily, simpler washing rituals were still important. Even a basin of water brought into the bedroom might be used to rinse the face, hands, and feet, removing the day's dust and sweat. The Romans placed great value on fresh, clean skin as a sign of health and civility. This practice was especially significant in a climate where dust and sweat could quickly accumulate and where personal grooming was a marker of one's place in society. After bathing or washing, the application of scented oils and unguents was customary. These oils, extracted from plants like lavender, myrtle, and rosemary, served multiple purposes. Beyond their pleasant aromas, they acted as moisturizers and antiseptics, protecting the skin through the night and easing any discomfort caused by dryness or minor irritations. The ritual of anointing the body with fragrant oils was an intimate and sensuous experience, often accompanied by gentle massage. This soothing practice further relaxed the body and mind, easing the transition to sleep. The use of oils also carried symbolic weight. In Roman thought, the body was a temple of the soul, and keeping it clean and fragrant was a form of respect not only for oneself but also for the gods. To retire without this ritual might invite discomfort or even spiritual imbalance. Indeed, cleanliness was linked to a kind of moral purity, a daily renewal that paralleled the spiritual cleansing offered through prayer and ritual. Clothing worn to bed reflected this concern for comfort and cleanliness. The night tunic, typically made of soft linen, was light and breathable, allowing the skin to breathe through the night. Wealthier Romans might own multiple garments for night use, carefully laundered and stored to avoid dirt and insects. Some even wore special socks or foot coverings to protect against the cold stone floors of their homes, which could chill the body and disturb sleep. Before slipping into bed, many Romans took care to freshen their sleeping space. The bedroom was not merely a place to lie down, but a carefully tended environment. Beds, often made with wooden frames and stuffed mattresses of wool, reeds, or feathers, were covered with clean linens. Sheets and blankets were changed regularly, and the smell of fresh fabric was part of the night's comfort. It was not uncommon for the linen to be lightly perfumed with aromatic herbs or powders, continuing the theme of scent as a sleep aid. Cleanliness extended beyond the body and bed to the very air of the sleeping chamber. Romans believed that stale air was unhealthy and disruptive to sleep. Windows and doors were often opened before nightfall to allow fresh air to circulate, carrying away odors and providing a cool breeze to ease breathing. In some homes, small braziers or lamps filled with scented oils were lit to both illuminate and cleanse the air. These gentle lights cast flickering shadows, but also spread pleasant aromas, helping to create an atmosphere conducive to rest. The preparation for sleep was sometimes accompanied by quiet rituals intended to protect health and ward off malevolent spirits. For example, it was common to sprinkle water or salt around the sleeping area as a purifying act. Certain herbs, like vervain or rue, might be hung near the bed or placed under pillows, believed to guard against nightmares and illness. These practices blended hygiene with superstition, showing how the Romans' understanding of cleanliness embraced both the physical and metaphysical realms. In wealthier households, slaves or personal attendants played a crucial role in sleep preparation. They might assist with bathing, dress the family members in night garments, and prepare the bedroom with fresh linens and scented oils. This attention to detail was part of the luxurious experience of Roman domestic life, but also a marker of social hierarchy. Many poorer citizens and slaves lacked access to such comforts, their sleep preparation far more basic. Children, too, participated in these nighttime routines, albeit with variations reflecting their age and status. Infants might be gently bathed and anointed, their bodies cared for by nurses or mothers. Older children learned from their parents' example, adopting the habits of cleanliness and ritual that would serve them throughout life. The transition to sleep was a moment of care and tenderness, the final act of the day's cycle. Medical writings from Roman physicians like Galen emphasized the health benefits of bathing and cleanliness in relation to sleep. Warm baths were prescribed to relieve muscular tension and mental agitation, conditions that, even then, were understood to interfere with restful slumber. Doctors cautioned against retiring immediately after eating or drinking too heavily, advising that a calm and cleansed body was the best foundation for sleep. Hygiene, in this sense, was not merely an aesthetic choice, but a vital aspect of health maintenance. Nighttime noise in city life. As the sun slipped beneath the horizon and the ancient city of Rome began to cloak itself in shadows, one might imagine a quiet descent into night, a hush settling over the bustling metropolis. Yet the reality was far from silent. Rome was a city that never truly slept, its streets alive with activity, its night punctuated by a symphony of sounds that wove through the air, seeping into the very rooms where its inhabitants sought rest. For the ancient Romans, the experience of sleep was inseparable from the city's vibrant and sometimes unruly nocturnal soundscape. Rome, at the height of its imperial glory, was a sprawling urban labyrinth packed with narrow alleys, open forums, bustling markets, and densely populated insula, multi-story apartment blocks where the majority of citizens lived. These insulae, often built with little regard for soundproofing, lined the streets in a haphazard tangle, their walls thin and windows open to the elements. Within this environment, noise traveled freely, shaping the nightly experience of sleep for Romans of all classes. The sounds of the city after dark were many and varied. Traders and tavern owners might linger long after the day's business closed, their voices raised in animated conversation or laughter. The clatter of carts and horseshoes on cobblestones echoed as workers returned home or slaves hurried through the streets on errands. Nearby, public latrines, fountains, and bathhouses continued their ceaseless flow of water, providing a steady, if not always soothing, background hum. Dogs barked and fought in the shadows, while the occasional brawl or public disturbance spilled noise and chaos into the night air. The very architecture of Roman neighborhoods contributed to this acoustic environment. The tight quarters of insulae meant that sounds from one household easily infiltrated another, and open courtyards acted as natural amplifiers. The lack of modern noise barriers meant that even the smallest sounds, footsteps on stairs, the creak of doors, whispered conversations, could travel across multiple floors and units. In some cases, neighbors' nightly routines became as audible as one's own, a shared soundscape of sleep and wakefulness. For the wealthy patricians, who often lived in spacious domus, private houses with thick stone walls, inner courtyards, and elaborate layouts, noise pollution was less pervasive, but still present. Even within these luxurious homes, servants and slaves moved about, attending to their duties at all hours, and the distant hum of city life could not be entirely shut out. Many patricians placed their bedrooms away from the street, seeking quieter spaces toward the interior, but the city's pulse remained never far. This constant noise presented challenges for achieving restful sleep, and the Romans developed a range of strategies to cope. Earplugs and similar noise-blocking devices are not documented, but the Romans' understanding of their environment fostered practical solutions. Thick curtains or wooden shutters helped muffle street sounds, while the placement of beds away from windows and nearer to inner rooms reduced exposure to noise. Some might have used heavy bedding or pillow arrangements to cushion sound vibrations, although these details are harder to confirm. The city's nighttime clamor also influenced the rhythm of Roman sleep. Unlike the modern expectation of an uninterrupted 8-hour slumber, many Romans likely experienced segmented sleep patterns, punctuated by periods of wakefulness. These interludes might be caused by external noise, household activity, or natural bodily cycles, and were often filled with reading, conversation, or prayer before returning to sleep. The presence of noise and social activity at night blurred the boundaries between day and night, rest and wakefulness, making the night a more fluid and communal experience. In addition to ambient urban sounds, specific noises carried distinct meanings and evoked cultural responses. The call of a night watchman, for instance, served as a reminder of the city's vigilance and the ever-present threat of fire or crime. Bells might toll at irregular hours, marking curfews or signaling emergencies. The cries of vendors selling late-night food or the distant shouts of revelers added layers to the nocturnal soundtrack, each sound embedded with social and practical significance. Noise also intersected with superstition and religious belief. Romans were attuned to the idea that certain sounds at night could be omens or portents. Unexplained noises might be interpreted as warnings from the gods or manifestations of restless spirits. The shriek of an owl or the sudden crash of falling objects might stir unease, coloring the experience of sleep with anxiety or caution. These associations heightened the emotional impact of nighttime noise, weaving it into the fabric of Roman spirituality and daily life. Despite these challenges, the city's night was not solely a time of disturbance. Many Romans found comfort in the familiar sounds of their neighborhood. a sonic cocoon that defined home and community. The low murmur of distant voices, the rhythmic tapping of footsteps, and the gentle flow of water could create a soothing backdrop, a steady presence amid the darkness. In this way, the noise of Rome was both an obstacle and a balm, an ever-present companion to the vulnerable state of sleep. For the urban poor and slaves, the impact of nighttime noise was often more acute. Crowded living conditions, lack of private space, and the demands of labor or servitude meant that sleep was frequently interrupted or limited. Noise from neighbors, street crowds, and household activities created an environment where rest was a scarce commodity. Yet, within these constraints, Romans adapted, finding moments of quiet or refuge where possible, and developing social bonds that helped endure the rigors of city life. The role of slaves and household staff further complicated the nocturnal soundscape. Many households employed night watchmen, servants who guarded property, tended fires, or performed other duties during the dark hours. Their movements and calls added to the chorus of night sounds, but also contributed to a sense of security. The presence of these watchers underscored the fragile balance between safety and disturbance that defined urban sleep. Ancient writers occasionally comment on the city's night noise, revealing contemporary attitudes and experiences. Seneca, for example, lamented the difficulty of finding peace amidst the clamor and bustle of Roman life, while Juvenal satirized the noisy neighbors and street vendors who robbed citizens of rest. These literary echoes give voice to the shared frustrations and adaptations that shaped the Roman sleep experience. In reflecting on the nighttime noise of Rome, we glimpse a world where rest was negotiated amid a living, breathing city. The constant sounds of people, animals, water, and work filled the hours of darkness, framing sleep not as an isolated act, but as part of the communal rhythm. Romans understood that to sleep well in such a city required more than physical comfort. It demanded acceptance of noise as a natural, even defining element of urban existence. As the moon traced its path over the rooftops and the city slowly surrendered to slumber, the sounds of Rome continued to ripple through the night. They were reminders of a world alive with life, danger, and possibility, a city whose heartbeat never ceased, even in the quietest hours. For those who rested within its walls, sleep was a fragile gift, embraced amidst the chorus of the living, a momentary piece woven into the vibrant tapestry of Roman life. Medical views on sleep and rest. In the ancient world, sleep was not merely a passive state of rest. It was a vital, mysterious process intimately connected to health, vitality, and the delicate balance of the human body. For the Romans, whose civilization was deeply influenced by Greek medicine and philosophy, sleep was studied, theorized about, and treated with care as an essential component of well-being. Medical views on sleep and rest intertwined scientific observation, philosophical reflection, and practical remedies, revealing a rich tapestry of knowledge and belief about the human body's nightly repose. Roman medical thought was largely shaped by the teachings of Hippocrates, the Greek physician often called the father of medicine, and later by the influential physician Galen, whose work dominated medical understanding for centuries. These physicians saw sleep as a natural cyclical state that reflected the balance or imbalance of the body's humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. According to humoral theory, a well-balanced body would experience regular, restful sleep, while disturbances in these vital fluids could lead to sleep disorders, nightmares, or insomnia. The humors were believed to be closely tied to the four qualities of hot, cold, wet, and dry. For example, an excess of phlegm associated with cold and wet was thought to cause lethargy and excessive sleepiness, while an abundance of yellow bile, hot and dry, might produce restlessness and sleeplessness. Thus, medical advice on sleep was often framed within this context of restoring balance through diet, lifestyle, and therapeutic interventions. Galen, in particular, emphasized the importance of sleep as a time for the body to repair itself, restore vital energies, and cleanse toxins. He described sleep as a period during which the vital spirits, or pneuma, circulated differently in the body, allowing for physical and mental rejuvenation. Sleep was not a mere cessation of activity, but an active, healing process essential to health. Consequently, disturbances in sleep were warning signs of deeper ailments, requiring attention, from both the patient and the physician. How Roman soldiers slept. When night fell over the sprawling Roman Empire, the routines of its most disciplined citizens, the legionaries, shifted from the tumult of marching in battle to the crucial, yet often uneasy hours of rest. Sleep for the Roman soldier was a precious, precarious necessity, shaped by the demands of military life, the challenges of camp life, and the ever-present specter of danger. Their sleep habits reveal not only the practical realities of ancient warfare, but also a window into the discipline, resilience, and adaptability that defined the Roman army. Unlike the patrician elites who enjoyed the relative comfort of well-appointed bedrooms and soft mattresses, Roman soldiers often found themselves sleeping under the open sky or in hastily erected tents. Their sleep environment was dictated by the needs of the campaign. Mobility, security, and readiness took precedence over comfort. In the heart of a marching camp, rows of tents formed orderly blocks, each sheltering a contubernum, a group of 8 soldiers who shared living quarters and responsibilities. The Roman military camp, or castra, was itself a marvel of organization, designed for rapid assembly and effective defense. This order extended to the rhythms of sleep and watchfulness. Soldiers were assigned to night watches, or vigiliae, staggered in shifts to guard the camp perimeter, man the walls, and patrol against surprise attacks. These duties meant that many legionaries experienced fragmented sleep, interrupted by calls to arms or the necessity to remain alert in cold or damp conditions. For those off duty was a critical reprieve. The soldiers used simple bedding, often a basic mat, cloak, or bedroll, and layered themselves in woolen cloaks for warmth. The design of their tents reflected the need to balance protection from the elements with ventilation, as stagnant air could cause discomfort or illness. Even so, the tents offered little more than rudimentary shelter, and soldiers were vulnerable to rain, cold, and the noises of the camp and surrounding wilderness. Sleep positions were likely dictated by practicality rather than luxury. Soldiers might sleep curled tightly to preserve heat or stretched out on their backs when space allowed. Their armor and weapons were carefully stored nearby, for readiness could mean the difference between life and death. The practice of sleeping fully armed was rare due to discomfort, but not unheard of in hostile territory. The Roman army's discipline extended to maintaining silence during rest periods. Yet the reality of camp life meant that the night was alive with sounds, the crackle of campfires, the murmur of sentries, and the distant calls of animals. Such noise, combined with the physical demands of the day, meant that sleep was often deep but could also be restless. The routines leading up to sleep reflected the soldiers' needs and constraints. After a day of grueling marches, drills, or combat, soldiers performed essential tasks such as repairing armor, preparing food, and tending wounds. Hygiene was basic but practiced when possible. Bathing in rivers or communal bathhouses near larger camps helped prevent illness, which was a constant threat. Mealtimes were scheduled to sustain energy without disrupting sleep. Dinner was usually a simple affair: pulse, a porridge of grains, salted meat, vegetables, and wine diluted with water. Heavy meals were avoided close to bedtime to prevent discomfort. Drinking water was carefully rationed, and wine's sedative effects may have aided sleep for some, though its dehydrating properties could also cause restless nights. Roman military medical knowledge addressed sleep difficulties as well. Physicians and medics in the camp understood that exhaustion, stress, and injury impacted rest. Remedies for insomnia or nightmares included herbal infusions, massage, and occasionally ritual prayers for protection. These practices aimed to sustain the soldier's vitality, crucial for enduring long campaigns. The psychological dimension of a soldier's sleep cannot be overlooked. The constant awareness of danger, enemy raids, wild animals, or treachery cast a shadow over the night. Dreams might be haunted by memories of battle or fears of loss, while the watchful sentry battled fatigue and anxiety in equal measure. Sleep was both a refuge and a vulnerability. Despite these hardships, the Roman military culture fostered resilience. Soldiers were trained to manage fatigue through discipline and routine. Short naps during the day, efficient use of rest periods, and a collective sense of duty helped sustain morale. The camaraderie within the contubernum also provided emotional support. sharing stories, encouragement, and reassurance in the face of uncertainty. Notably, the structure of the Roman camp reflected an understanding of human needs for rest and security. Guards were rotated systematically, firelight was carefully managed to avoid attracting enemies while providing comfort, and strict orders maintained orderliness and minimized disruptions. This system allowed the army to maintain operational readiness even under the stresses of extended campaigns far from home. The strategic importance of sleep was recognized at the highest levels of command. Commanders like Julius Caesar and Augustus understood that a well-rested legion was more effective, alert, and cohesive. Thus, camps were designed not only for defense, but for facilitating adequate rest, underscoring the essential role sleep played in military success. Festivals, feasts, and their impact on sleep. In the vibrant heartbeat of ancient Rome, few things shaped the rhythms of daily life quite like its festivals and feasts. These occasions, whether sacred rites or jubilant celebrations, punctuated the calendar with a unique kind of energy, an energy that stirred the city's streets and homes, extending deep into the night and inevitably disrupting the natural ebb and flow of sleep. For Romans, sleep was not merely a private physical necessity. It was enmeshed within a complex social and religious tapestry, where communal revelry and divine observance often redefined the quiet hours when rest was expected. Roman festivals, known as feria, were plentiful, ranging from solemn religious observances to exuberant public holidays. These events were deeply intertwined with the agricultural calendar, the worship of gods and goddesses, and the celebration of military victories. Whether the Saturnalia, the Lupercalia, or the Cerealia, each festival carried its own rituals, customs, and social expectations, many of which had profound implications for sleep. During the Saturnalia, perhaps the most famous of Roman festivals, the city was transformed into a space of chaotic joy and role reversals. This mid-December celebration honored Saturn, the god of time and agriculture, and was marked by lavish feasting, gift-giving, gambling, and the loosening of social hierarchies. Masters served their slaves, and traditional discipline gave way to merriment. Homes and public spaces were illuminated by countless oil lamps and torches, casting flickering shadows that danced through the streets long after the sun had set. The nights of Saturnalia were notoriously lively. Feasts spilled over with rich foods, roast meats, pastries, honeyed fruits, and copious wine, encouraging a festive atmosphere that was both intoxicating and facilitating. Public banquets, theatrical performances, and singing extended into the small hours. For many Romans, sleep was delayed or fragmented, replaced by communal engagement and sensory delight. Yet these disruptions were embraced, understood as temporary sacrifices for the sake of honoring the gods and participating in a collective experience of renewal and goodwill. Other festivals followed similar patterns. The Lupercalia, celebrated in mid-February, was an ancient rite tied to fertility and purification. Priests known as Luperci performed rituals that included sacrifices and the running of young men through the city, whipping bystanders with goat hides to promote fertility. The night before and the day of the festival buzzed with anticipation and activity, often delaying sleep with the preparation of ceremonial spaces and communal gatherings. The rituals were intense and sometimes raucous, weaving together reverence and exuberance. The Cerealia, dedicated to Ceres, goddess of grain and harvest, was observed in the spring with processions, games, and offerings. These festivals served a critical social function, linking the well-being of the community and the land to the favor of the divine. As such, the involvement of entire families and neighborhoods meant that the usual rhythms of sleep were often secondary to participation in the rites, whether attending evening sacrifices or engaging in nocturnal feasting. In the densely packed neighborhoods of Rome, the impact of festivals on sleep was acutely felt. The city's streets would fill with throngs of people, spilling from public squares to narrow alleys. Markets remained open late, street musicians and entertainers performed, and food vendors hawked their wares by lantern light. The ambient noise, music, shouting, laughter, permeated the night, often making sleep difficult for those living near the festival centers. Yet, this disruption was balanced by a shared cultural understanding. Sleep was viewed as flexible, capable of yielding to the demands of religious duty and social connection. Romans prized participation in these communal events, often valuing the spiritual and social nourishment gained over the physical rest sacrificed. In some ways, sleep itself was considered part of a larger cycle of activity and rest, festivity and reflection. The feasts associated with festivals added another layer of complexity to sleep patterns. Roman banquets were affairs of great importance, symbolizing status, hospitality, and the reaffirmation of social bonds. These meals often extended well into the evening, involving multiple courses, entertainment, and philosophical conversation. Wine flowed freely, and the effects of intoxication could delay sleep for hours. For some, this delay was deliberate, part of a cultivated lifestyle that celebrated indulgence and conviviality. Yet for others, particularly slaves and servants who worked behind the scenes, the extended feasts meant late hours of preparation and cleanup, often at the expense of their own rest. The demands of service imposed a different kind of sleeplessness, one marked by labor and exhaustion rather than celebration. Religious rituals linked to festivals also shaped sleep in subtler ways. Prayers, offerings, and rites performed at dusk or midnight sought to invoke divine protection through the vulnerable night hours. Some households might keep lamps burning throughout the night, a practice both symbolic and practical to ward off evil spirits or bad dreams. This created an atmosphere where sleep was often accompanied by heightened awareness and ritual precaution. The timing of festivals sometimes clashed with natural sleep cycles, especially in the case of celebrations held in seasons with shorter nights or unpredictable weather. Romans were keenly aware of the importance of aligning their activities with the rhythms of nature, yet the demands of public religious life often required sacrifices to these rhythms. The tension between societal obligations and bodily needs reflected a broader Roman worldview that embraced duty, endurance, and adaptability. Interestingly, some festivals included specific rituals designed to promote good sleep and pleasant dreams. For instance, offerings of herbs known for their soothing properties, such as lavender, mint, or chamomile, might be made at altars before retiring for the night. These botanical practices complemented the communal celebrations, blending the sacred with the practical in the quest for rest amid revelry. The psychological impact of festivals on sleep was profound as well. For many Romans, participation in collective joy and religious ceremony alleviated anxieties and fostered a sense of belonging. Yet the excitement, noise, and sometimes overindulgence also heightened physical and emotional arousal, making the transition to restful sleep challenging. Ancient writers occasionally lamented the toll of festival excesses on health and vigor, noting that too many nights of disrupted rest could weaken even the strongest citizens. For slaves and lower-class citizens, the effects of festivals on sleep were more ambivalent. While some shared in the public festivities, many remained on the margins, burdened by additional duties or unable to partake fully. The noise and bustle that disrupted the sleep of the privileged thus could represent a source of exhaustion or distress rather than pleasure. In the countryside, away from the city's tumult, festivals maintained their importance but affected sleep differently. Here, the pace of life was more closely aligned with the natural world, and celebrations often took place in open fields or temple precincts under the stars. Sleep might be sacrificed for communal fireside storytelling, music, or prayer, blending the human and divine realms in a more intimate way. Through all these varied experiences, one constant remained. Sleep in ancient Rome was a fluid state, negotiated amidst the demands of religion, society, and the body. Festivals and feasts, with their dazzling lights and lively sounds, created moments when the usual rhythms of rest gave way to celebration and spiritual renewal. These nights, though restless, were woven into the fabric of Roman life, a testament to the enduring human need to balance the pleasures and duties of waking hours with the restorative power of sleep. In reflecting on the impact of festivals and feasts on sleep, we come to appreciate a culture that embraced complexity, a world where sleep was not only a biological imperative, but also a social and religious act, shaped by the cycles of community and cosmos alike. The restless nights of ancient Rome celebrations echo across time, reminding us that sleep, in all its forms, has always been a deeply human experience, shaped by the rhythms of culture, belief, and shared life.